Hey, hello, true crime people, true crime people, true crimer Hi. Guess what? This is gonna be 3 hours and 30 plus minutes. Yeah, that's how long this compilation video is. I posted a lot of true crime stuff over on TikTok in the month of July. The majority of these videos are true crime, peppered in with a couple of like silly videos I did, but this is mainly true crime videos, and hot diggity dog, I was busy, I guess, in July, so feast your eyes on this. Don't feast. Feasting your... fudge, I'm awkward. Hi! Let's start over, shall we? Hi, I'm Mike. I was born on March... Wait a minute, that's a little too far back. Okay, hi. Just watch it. Enjoy 3 hours and 30 minutes of just a lot of sadness. There's really not much happy about any of this, so it's... Okay, well, that's your intro. Super clean and fresh as always. Didn't trip up anything. Perfect. Nailed it. Just shut up, Mike, and get onto it. Okay, anyway, here are 64,000 videos from my TikTok page from the month of July. This is longer than Titanic, folks. Yep, longer than The Lord of the Rings, each movie. Almost the whole trilogy. Viewer discretion. Viewer discretion. Viewer discretion is what? Oh, viewer discretion is... A man who didn't even own a car was found burned to death inside a vehicle, and to this day, his case is still unsolved. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Adam Campbell. Viewer discretion is advised. 26-year-old Adam Campbell lived in Escanaba in Michigan. Shortly before this story takes place, Adam had actually just moved back to Escanaba from Marquette. He was someone who just loved to hang out with his friends, get dolled up, and just go have a good night out. He was also the father to a young boy, and he was a wonderful, wonderful father. Adam was the type of person who would give you the shirt off his own back if you needed it. He just wanted to make sure everyone was having fun and that everyone was good. In the early morning hours of April 9th, 2011, Adam was here at Barron's Bar, and it was located on Ludington Street. According to friends, Adam had received a text message from an unknown female asking him to meet her at the bar. His friends don't know who the female was, but apparently this female never showed up to the bar, so Adam just decided to hang out for a few hours, have some drinks, and then he was seen leaving at approximately 2:30 in the morning. Approximately an hour later, at around 3:30 a.m., firefighters were called to this alley. In between two garages, and this is located on South 19th Street and 3rd Avenue, there was a car on fire, completely engulfed in flames. Firefighters put the fire out, and once they did, they realized there was somebody inside. They found the charred remains of a man. They would later be identified as 26-year-old Adam Campbell. His exact cause of death has not been released, but this is being treated obviously as a homicide, foul play. Adam didn't own a car, he didn't even have a driver's license. And whose car it belonged to? That seems to be unknown or has not been revealed to the public. Police had found some footage from the bar from approximately 12:39 a.m., and Adam here is seen, I guess, conversing with someone in a shirt that has the number 9 on it, maybe a jersey. They have not said this man is a suspect, just that he is a person of interest. But what involvement they think he may have is kind of unknown. Police also have a theory that Adam was killed in a mistaken identity situation. They have a person in mind whose name was also Adam, who also looked very similar to him. They haven't released the details of the person's full name or his status, but that's just a theory they have. But as it stands now, about 12 years later, his murder is still unsolved. They've gotten tips, but nothing has led to anything, and they are desperately asking for the public's help. If you have any information, call 800-222-8477. There is a reward. The coroner would warn that metal drinking straws should never be used with a fixed lid, and this is one of the reasons why. Hello, true crimerers. This is another Worst Unusual Deaths. Viewer discretion is advised. This was 60-year-old Elena Struthers Gardner, and she lived in Broadstone, England. At the time of the story, she was a retired jockey. This particular story happened in November of 2018 when she was in her home. Elena went to the kitchen to fix herself a drink, and she was using one of those glass mason jars with the screw top lid, and it had the pre-punctured hole up top so that you could put a metal straw, eco-friendly straw, in it. The particular straw she was using was 10 inches. As she was walking back to the living room or wherever she was going, she accidentally slipped and she fell on top of the mason jar on her head, basically. The 10-inch metal straw went through her left eye socket and it pierced directly into her brain. Elena's wife, unfortunately, would discover her on the ground, and she described it as she was like just making these gurgling noises, and she was kind of like wriggling about. She was rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately within a day, she would be pronounced dead. The coroner would advise that these metal straws, because they're rigid, they are a solid piece of metal. And the coroner said that when you put them in a fixed position, like through the lid of a mason jar with just a little straw hole, you are basically creating a very dangerous situation if you fall. I mean, basically, it's like cementing a knife, So it's better to be in a position where the straw can like move around. But if you are using jars like this with a fixed metal straw, now knowing the story, just be extra mindful when it comes to handling these. You never in a million years think something like this can happen, but this straw went through a person's eye, through their socket, and embedded in their brain, killing them. Just be careful. A man has been missing for roughly a week out of Cape Coral, Florida. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Barry Schmalbach. Viewer discretion is advised. Barry James Schmalbach is a 56-year-old man in Cape Coral, Florida. He is a member of the LGBTQIA+, and he does have a boyfriend. Barry was last seen on July 19th, 2023 at approximately 11 p.m. He had been at Cruiser's Bar, which is a gay bar there in the area, with his boyfriend. After Barry left the bar, presumably on his own, because him and his boyfriend had gotten into a fight, according to witnesses there at the bar, Barry has not been seen since. And it's now been more than a week, and nothing. Basically, once family and friends could not get a hold of him, some of them went to his condo, which they had a key to because he had previously had a heart attack, I guess, so he gave them a key for emergencies. And apparently his condo was like a mess, and he's not normally a messy person. All of the lights were still on, and again, that was very unlike Barry. Now, when they first went to his apartment, they said that his Jeep was not in the parking lot. But when they went back the next day, his Jeep was in the parking lot. And that was here at these condos. Something unusual was that all of the doors were unlocked. There was like mud caked on the sides of the Jeep, which was very strange to them. And there was a whole bunch of sand in the back. Police have basically said that this is something quite unusual because usually when someone goes missing, they can like have some kind of trail, like a paper trail, electronic trail, but they can't find anything on Barry. One of his friends told police something pretty concerning. Barry had called the friend and said, "Can you come help me? I need to get this idiot out of the house. I can't take this anymore." Barry was referring to his boyfriend. According to Barry's friends, they had not really had many interactions with the boyfriend, and they said that was always kind of a red flag. So to them, it sounded like Barry needed help basically breaking up with the boyfriend and or getting him out of the condo. Then Barry and his boyfriend were seen having an argument at the cruiser's bar. Barry then leaves and is never seen again. According to the boyfriend, Barry must have gotten into an Uber or someone's car, and that's all he would say. So the boyfriend, Christopher Davis, allegedly gave false information to police about himself. He also has active warrants for his arrest in South Carolina and Georgia, but they right now can't prove he did anything to Barry. If you have any information about the disappearance of Barry Schmalbach, please call 800-780-8477. After gunning down 2 people, he would look at everyone else and say, "Merry Christmas." Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of the Drake Diner murders. Viewer discretion is advised. It was a cold November 29th, 1992 evening in Des Moines, Iowa. By 7 p.m., the diner was full of people for the dinner rush. But a few minutes after 7, all hell would break loose. A man armed with a gun would rush into the restaurant and grab one of the managers by her throat. And without any hesitation, he put the gun to her head and he pulled the trigger. That was 25-year-old Kara McGrain. She was killed instantly. 28-year-old Tim Burnett also worked at the diner. He was not scheduled to work that day, but he decided to come in to help set up the Christmas tree. He was in the back of the diner when the commotion of the gunshot and the screamings rang out, so he ran to the front. The assailant then pointed the gun at Tim, and he fired another round. He killed Tim Burnett instantly. The murderer then forced one of the hostesses to open up the cash registers. She did, and he took all the money he could, roughly $500. He then ran to the entrance where he turned around, looked at everyone who was terrified and screaming, and he just casually said, "Have a Merry Christmas," and then he took off. Police arrived. They were able to collect, some of the ammunition that was used. They got a description from many people from the restaurant who described the individual as a younger black male. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt, but not much else was given. Because of the vague description, it created a lot of racial tension in the area, because now a lot of young black men were being falsely accused of being the killer. And it just created a nightmare scenario for the black community. But eventually, police caught wind of 17-year-old Joseph Jojo White Jr. Well, they caught wind of him because he, along with a bunch of friends, were having a party at a motel room and using a bunch of drugs, and they were firing off guns. Unbelievably, they managed to find a slug from one of the gunshots he had fired at this party. Those slugs matched. They were the perfect match for the ammunition that was used to kill the 2 individuals at Drake's Diner. Furthermore, police tracked down the owner of the gun. They said a few days prior to the murders, Jojo had actually taken that gun from them. So on December 5th, 1992, he was arrested and charged with the 2 murders. He was also ID'd by many of the witnesses from the restaurant. At one point, he escaped jail, but they quickly apprehended him. He was convicted and sentenced to 2 life sentences without parole. Due to a Supreme Court ruling about juveniles being convicted, he had to go through a resentencing hearing, where he was once again given 2 life sentences without parole. It happened 29 years ago, and it is still unsolved. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Melanie Cabay. Viewer discretion is advised. In 1994, Melanie Cabay was a 19-year-old girl living in Montreal, Canada. Melanie was described as a very casual person, but also very confident, and she was a very independent individual. On the night of June 22nd, 1994, Melanie was over at a friend's house. They were watching a movie. When the movie was over, she would leave the friend's house, and this is approximately 1:45 in the morning. Apparently, she was with a former boyfriend of hers when they left. They got to a bus stop because she was going to be busing back to her home. I don't know if the boyfriend went his separate ways or got on the bus with her. I'm not positive. But Melanie never got home. So by the next morning, basically a few hours later, she was reported missing by her family. So for the next couple of weeks, they're searching like crazy. They are questioning her former boyfriend. They're questioning the friend whose house they were at, but they don't come up with anything. But sadly, 2 weeks after she was reported missing, she was found. Her body was located about 25 kilometers northeast of Montreal. She was in a really bad state of decomposition, so it took a few days to actually identify her. She was discovered by this passing motorist, Michael Chartier. He said he was riding his motorcycle in the area on a dirt road when he smelled something really strong, and the odor took him to a pile of shingles, and Melanie was under those shingles. Now, a day or so after Melanie actually disappeared, in the field where Melanie was later found, another woman was assaulted by a man, and this is how she described him. He sexually assaulted this woman, and she managed to get away. By the way, police were unsure if Melanie Cabay was actually sexually assaulted or not because her body was in such bad shape. That dude looks a lot like this, but there really wasn't much physical evidence left behind, however. So an anonymous individual would put up a $15,000 reward for any information that would lead to the capture of the person who did this. That person then lowered the compensation to $10,000, I'm not sure why, and also gave it a deadline. And then the deadline passed, the reward was taken away, and it led to no tips. It definitely seems a little strange to put a deadline on this kind of thing, but police don't know if this man had anything to do with Melanie's murder. I don't know if they investigated this gentleman. A lot of times the people who find the bodies, especially in areas like that, can sometimes be a suspect, but I don't know if they looked into him. As far as I know, they were able to clear her former boyfriend and other people in her life, and to this very day, her murder is still a mystery. 29 years later, who knows if it'll ever be solved. Oh my god. Oh my god. I'm reporting this video for bullying. In the late evening hours of July 27th, 2019, a young mother would be found murdered in a cemetery. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Nye'Tazia Hicks. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this story, Nye'Tazia Hicks is a 17-year-old girl living in Portsmouth, Virginia. She was actually the mother to a 6-month-old baby named Bobby Jr. She was a young mother, but she was a very good mother. She absolutely loved her baby boy. Nye'Tazia's mom said that she had a smile that would brighten up the entire world. And that's just the energy she brought to everyone. But sadly, her life would be cut short at just 17 years old. It was July 27th, 2019, sometime in the late evening. Police got this kind of garbled 911 call. It was really hard to understand. But what they did hear was that there may be a body at a cemetery there locally in Portsmouth. When police arrived, they in fact found the body of a young woman, and she appeared to have been shot to death. She was pronounced dead at the scene. She would soon be identified as 17-year-old Nye'Tazia Hicks. At first, they're like, what on earth caused this to happen? How did she end up here in a cemetery? Police would ask everyone in the area, and nobody heard a gunshot. And judging by kind of like the lack of blood there at the scene under her, they believed that she was probably killed somewhere else and then just dumped there. So they did some digging, and they discovered that Nye'Tazia was going to the Charlestown condominiums on that very evening, July 27th, 2019. There, she was meeting a woman named Simone Worrell. Nye'Tazia was apparently going to the apartment to babysit her kids. She offered Nye'Tazia $200. And then somehow, some way, something bizarre happens. And it's still kind of unclear. Simone has a 14-year-old son who would end up being charged with the murder of Nye'Tazia Hicks. He would be charged with felony murder. What he claims is that he had shown Nye'Tazia this gun they had in the house. He first said the gun just went off accidentally and she died from it. Then he changed the story to say they were wrestling with the gun and then it went off and then she was killed. Whatever the true story is still kind of not known, but Simone would come back and she didn't want to get in trouble, so she helped dispose of the body. It was them that called 911, but they were trying to stop the bleeding as they were calling, which is why the call was so jumbled. Her father was there and said, you need to call 911 and get her to the hospital, but she didn't do that. So she would be charged with accessory. No charges pressed against her father. He tried to help. A trial has yet to take place. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Here we go. All right, here we go. Okay. No. A little whiplash. Whiplash. Okay, no, we're good. Yay! Oh. Woohoo! Oh, here we go. Here was so okay. Oh, this is so much fun. Oh, look at that crazy dip. Did we break? Oh, here comes the exciting part. Here it comes. About to do some crazy loops and loops and it's a... Hello, true crimerers. This is another Deaths at Theme Parks. Viewer discretion is advised. The ride I showed you at the beginning was actually a ride called Twist and Shout, which was a variation of the ride we're actually talking about today, Wild Wonder. And this occurred at Gillian's Wonderland Pier in Ocean City, New Jersey. 39-year-old Kimberly Bailey was there with her 8-year-old daughter, Jessica. And this was in August of 1999. The Wild Wonder is a relatively calm ride, not very fast, but this incident took place before the ride could even truly get going. So this is an animation of what happened. They were in the front car, which is the green one right there, and it was going up the very steep hill. Because of some mechanical issues involving like the chain and the safety mechanisms, there was a minor misalignment, which caused their cart to roll all the way back, and then it smashed into the cart that was still being loaded. And this was at a pretty decent speed. The 39-year-old woman and her 8-year-old daughter were actually thrown from their cart, even though they had the safety bar on, and they landed about 10 to 12 feet below. Both of them were pronounced dead at the scene. It was a combination of the initial impact and landing on the ground below that caused their deaths. The incident happened because the theme park decided to use some unofficial, materials, which was considered illegal to do in the state of New Jersey. They were trying to cut corners, cut costs. So they, of course, were fined, and this incident ended up changing New Jersey amusement park laws. The ride would later be reinstated and has operated safely ever since. I can't find info on if this family sued or not. A tiny scratch of pink paint would help identify a killer. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Vicki Lynne Hoskinson. Viewer discretion is advised. Vicki Lynne was born on February 2nd, 1976, and she was one of 4 kids, and the family lived in Tucson, Arizona. And they lived here in this home. On September 17th, 1984, Vicki Lynne's mother asked her to leave the house and go down the street to drop off a letter at the mailbox, something Vicki Lynne had done all the time. Vicki was more than happy to do this all the time because she was excited to ride her prized pink bike, which she had gotten a Christmas or so ago. But about 20 to 30 minutes later, the 8-year-old girl did not return home, and that was extremely unusual. The trip to the mailbox was literally just down the road. So Vicki Lynne's mom sent out an older sister to go see if she can find her. She didn't find Vicki Lynne, but she did find her pink bike. It looked like it had been in some kind of scuffle. This was just a couple blocks from the house, and it was a block away from the elementary school Vicki went to. Within a few hours of her disappearance, the entire community was out there looking for her, and then a couple of days would go by. They got billboards up. This was all over the news, but there was just no sign of her anywhere. That's when this man, Sam Hall, had come forward to police. Sam was actually a coach there at the elementary school Vicki attended. Well, roughly 40 minutes before Vicki had vanished, he said he saw a very suspicious vehicle parked right by the school. There was a man inside, and this man was just sort of staring at the kids. Sam here basically gave the dude a stare down, and this, by the way, is a description of the man in that vehicle. But eventually, the man took off. but Sam made sure to focus his attention on the license plate, and he was able to remember the entire thing. So once all this information about Vicki disappearing came out, he went to police and told them. They pulled up the registration information for that vehicle and they found its owner. His name was Frank Jarvis Atwood. He was a 28-year-old man who was originally from Los Angeles. He was actually out on parole. For what? For sexually assaulting an 8-year-old child in California. It took some time, but they were able to get his vehicle because he had brought it to Texas, but this was his vehicle and it matched the description of the car that the coach saw at the school. There was some recent-ish fresh damage to the bumper, and when they looked really closely, they found a single strip of pink, the exact same color of Vicki's bike. So they did a whole lot of science stuff, and they chipped off this pink paint and they compared it to the pink paint from Vicki's bike, and it basically was a match. It was the same paint. Now, they also took a scraping from Vicki's bike, the paint, and they noticed that in this paint, there was a tiny bit of nickel in it, which is not typically found in paint. Well, it turns out there was a cross transfer because the nickel from this bumper transferred to Vicki's bike, and it was an exact match to the nickel here. They then took Vicki's bike and they placed it underneath his vehicle because there was this strange little indent right there. And when they lined it up, it was an absolute perfect match, the curvature and everything, to the pedal of Vicki's bike. Also, right by where Vicki's bike was found, there was a mailbox that had some damage to it. So they lined up the back bumper of Frank Atwood's vehicle to the damage here, and it was a perfect match, a line basically with his bumper. So what they think happened was that Frank had slowly bumped into Vicki while she was on her bike just in order to knock it over and get her off of it. He then faked some reason to put her in his vehicle, and as he was backing up, he hit this mailbox. Frank Atwood was then arrested and charged with kidnapping, but the body still had not been found. That is until April 12, 1985. Approximately 20 miles from where Vicki was taken, a hiker found skeletal remains in the desert. They found a human skull, which then police would take the dental records from that skull and they matched it to Vicki's, and they confirmed that it was her remains. They would go on to find these remains, but they never found her entire body. They believe animals had gotten to the rest of her. She had been found in a really shallow ditch. Like a grave had been dug for her. There was water damage to the bones, which they were able to link up with the weather forecast from the date around the time she went missing, that there was torrential downpour, which would have filled up the grave that he had put her in, which caused the damage to those bones. Because he said that he was already arrested before, the body was put there, but they proved that that was not the case. So Frank Atwood was then charged additionally with the murder as well as kidnapping, and he was found guilty of all charges. In May of 1987, he was sentenced to death. Unbelievably, it took Arizona 35 years to execute him. He was executed in 2022 by lethal injection. The evidence against him was absolutely staggering, and hopefully Vicki is resting in peace. A 14-year-old girl is currently missing from Forest Lake, Minnesota. Hello, true crimerers. This is the missing persons case of Desiray Kappes. Viewer discretion is advised. Desiray Kappes, and I apologize if I'm saying her last name incorrectly. This is her pictured with her mom. Desiray just turned 14 back on May 3rd, 2023. A couple of weeks later, on May 19th, her mother, Mandy, had last seen Desiray at approximately 8 o'clock in the morning. Mandy left for work that morning and she just said goodbye to Desiray. I'll see you when I get home. It was just a very normal morning. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But when Mandy got home later that day, Desiray was gone, as was their cat, Cosmo. Now, according to CCTV footage from that neighborhood, I guess, or from the house, there is an image of Desiray getting on her bike and basically pedaling away from the home. This was approximately 8:30 a.m., so just 30 minutes after her mom left. Desiray can be seen with a backpack on. It's actually her pet backpack, so it's meant to carry her cat. She goes everywhere with that cat. She never leaves him behind. These are just more photos of her. Mandy says there was a note left behind in the house, and it's extremely concerning. The note that was allegedly written by Desiray said she was going to be traveling around the United States with her boyfriend. To her mom's knowledge, she didn't have a boyfriend. She barely left the house, like ever. She thinks that she may have been in contact with someone online. This may be someone, possibly, who pretended to be someone her age in order to lure her out. This could potentially be a catfish situation. This, by the way, is what her cat Cosmo looks like. Her mom suspects that the person who's with Desiray may now be holding the cat essentially as kind of like a hostage. You know, maybe threatening to hurt Cosmo in order to get Desiray to do whatever this person wants her to do. Again, this is just speculation. She has been missing for longer than a month. So police do have her dental records, they have her DNA on file. So they are now asking, pleading to the public, if you see Desiray, to please report it to police. Desiray, if you by chance see this video, you need to contact your mom or contact the police. But you have to work under the assumption that Desiray may be endangered. She may have been lured out of her home by a predator. Possibly. She's 5'6", with brown hair and brown eyes, and about 125 pounds. If you have any information, please call 651-439-9381. Hello, true crimeers. I do have some wonderful news. I had recently covered the disappearance of 14-year-old Desiray Cappes, and she had been missing for approximately 2 months. But as of yesterday, Friday, July 21st, Desiray Cappes has been found alive and safe. There is not a lot of information as of this time, but they say that she is healthy and is cooperating with investigators. The sheriff's office said its investigation is ongoing and hinted that more information could be released in the coming days. But it is the weekend, so they probably won't have any updates until, I'm guessing, sometime next week. Where exactly she was located and if she was with anyone in particular, again, I'm not sure. They have not released any of that information publicly yet. But obviously, the most important thing is that she is home, she is safe, and she is alive. Whether or not investigators do release all the information to the public, that is up to them. It is not our business if they keep it private. But this is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful update. I was very happy to find out she got home. Hello, true crimeers. This is another Worst Animal Attacks. Viewer discretion is advised. This particular story takes us to the San Diego Wild Animal Park, located in, you figured it out? Los Angeles, San Diego, California. It's actually now known as the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. They changed names. But back in 1991, a horrible incident occurred. It was March of 1991, and a trainer, Pamela Orsi, she was inside, I guess, the Asian elephant habitat. Pamela had been there at the Wild Animal Park for roughly a year, but she had been a zookeeper for approximately 6 years. She had previously come from New York, and she worked at the Bronx Zoo. As she was in the elephant compound, 2 of the female Asian elephants started to fight, like a big physical brawl between the 2 of them. Pamela somehow got caught in the middle of these 2 elephants fighting. There were no witnesses to actually see this event, they only heard the sounds. But it is believed that if she witnessed the elephants beginning to fight, she may have tried to do something to intervene and just got caught in the middle. She would have only been armed with a 3-foot-long wooden stick that has like a metal hook at the end, which is meant to prod the elephants. They also use verbal commands in order to try to control the elephants, but clearly none of this was working. So Pamela ended up getting trampled by at least one of the elephants. She would end up getting severe blunt force trauma to her body. The majority of Pamela's injuries occurred to her head. So I guess the only thing I could really say is because it was to her head, I hope that it was quick and that she didn't actually feel much of anything. But given that there were no witnesses, people did hear the elephants fighting, people did hear screaming, but we'll never know exactly what happened. When I was a kid, from San Diego, we used to go there, San Diego Zoo, SeaWorld. Used to absolutely love going to these places as a kid. But now, I hate these places. Absolutely hate them. Look, I know that a lot of these animals are there because they're endangered or they needed to be rescued or whatever the case may be, but I just hate that these animals are kept in these compounds and poked and prodded with sticks and stuff. I don't know, it's gross. And honestly, I just wish they didn't exist. I just don't think people and giant animals should be coexisting, because clearly it can be extremely dangerous and lethal. A woman was found brutally murdered in a field, and it would take 39 years to catch her killer. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Helene Pruszynski. Viewer discretion is advised. Helene Pruszynski was born on April 5th, 1958, and that was in Huntington, New York. She would end up attending college in Boston, and then after that, she would move to Englewood, Colorado. It was there that she became an intern for a radio station, but unfortunately, 2 weeks after she started that internship, she would be killed. It was January 16th, 1980. Helene went to work like normal, and then afterwards, she would get on a bus and head back to the house she was living at with her aunt. Helene always came home directly after work, but on January 16th, she didn't. And if she was ever going to be late getting home, she would call her aunt, but she didn't do that either. So her aunt called Helene's boss. The boss said that Helene left around 6 p.m. So her aunt went driving around the area to see if she could find her, but she found nothing. So she reported her missing. Sadly, the following day, she would be found. She was discovered by authorities near Highland Ranch in a very large, just very open field. Helene was on her back, her shirt was pulled up above her chest. Every indication looked like she had been sexually assaulted. And she had several stab wounds to her back. Police found the impression of what they thought was a cowboy boot near her body. They also collected male bodily fluid from Helene, but back in 1980, they didn't have the technology to run it into a system. But thankfully, they collected it and stored it properly. Police believe that Helene got on the bus after work, and then when she got off the bus in order to take the final steps back to her house, that is where she was likely kidnapped. Witnesses would see a man in the area that looked like this, and it appeared he was not up to any good. So they put this image out there, but unfortunately the case just went cold. There was no tips, no leads, she didn't have any enemies, no jilted lovers. They interviewed her coworkers, her family. They ruled out everyone. In 1998, they were able to take that DNA they had and put it into the system, but still it matched no one. And then in 2017, they used the forensic genealogy DNA testing, and they found relatives of the person who left DNA on Helene, which would lead them to James Curtis Clanton. So what they did to make sure it was really him, they followed him around, and as he threw things away, they collected those items, ran the DNA from those items, and they confirmed it was him. He was Helene Pruszynski's killer. At this time, he's living in Florida, so they extradited him back to Colorado. On the way there, he confessed to all of it. Helene was a random target. He got life without parole. It's been 73 years, and they are still wondering, where is Jeannie? Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Jeannie Bryant. Viewer discretion is advised. Ricky Jean Bryant, who everyone would call Jeannie, she was born on November 9th, 1945. The family lived here in Mauston, Wisconsin, and they lived on a farmhouse. Jeannie also had 3 siblings. So on December 19th, 1949, I guess their parents were out, and so the kids were staying with the grandparents. One of the siblings was actually at school while the other ones were at home with the grandparents at this time. This must have occurred sometime in the afternoon, I'm assuming. But on that December 19th afternoon in 1949, a fire broke out at their farmhouse. The entire home was completely engulfed in flames. This is where the story gets strange. So Jeannie's brother claims that everyone rushed out of the house and that he and Jeannie were standing on the front lawn. He said the two of them were kind of just there staring at the fire when all of a sudden a woman in a vehicle pulls up to them, and she told the brother, go get help and go to this neighbor's house, even though there was a neighbor who was actually closer. When the brother came back from doing that, he said that Jeannie and this woman were both gone. But the grandmother has a different story. She says she took Jeannie's brother and sister out of the house when the fire started. She then rushed back in to see if she could find Jeannie, but she could not find her. She screamed for her name, but got no response. The firefighters arrived, they put out the fire, which took some time, and Jeannie's remains were never actually found inside the house. She has never been seen again. They searched the debris of the home, and they searched and searched and searched very thoroughly. They found no traces of the 4-year-old girl. There were what they thought were tiny little bone fragments, but at the time they said they did not belong to Jeannie. I don't know how they knew that, or maybe they determined they weren't human bones. That being said, it's the belief that Jeannie died in the fire and she was just completely destroyed. Jeannie's siblings kind of grew up thinking that someone actually took her deliberately and hid her from the family, that the fire was started deliberately as like a decoy. They think that Jeannie was conceived out of wedlock, which was highly frowned upon, definitely back then, but there's no actual proof of that. That's just a theory. That's just what the siblings think. There was a woman who came forward in 2006 who thought she may be her, but they tested her DNA and it was not her. This is an age progression photo of what Jeannie may look like today. She would be about 77 years old, but she's never been found. He would kill these 5 people in order to cover up another one of his crimes. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of William Craig Miller. Viewer discretion is advised. William Craig Miller was a husband and a father. He owned restoration companies that would go around and basically clean up crime scenes, houses that were burned down by fires. He made a lot of money. He and his family lived in Scottsdale, Arizona. Well, in 2005, their home in Scottsdale, Arizona mysteriously burnt down, and one of their animals was killed in the fire. But he, his wife, and his child were unharmed. At first, it appeared to be an accidental fire. But then a few weeks after the fire, a woman named Tammy Lovell called police. Tammy was the girlfriend of a man named Stephen Duffy. Stephen was friends with William Craig Miller. He actually worked for William. Basically, the two of them had information that William Craig Miller had actually set fire to his own home in an attempt to commit fraud, insurance fraud. So with their help, police would indict William Craig Miller. But, he was a rich man, so he was just out and about on bail, roaming the streets of Arizona. On February 21st, 2006, police were notified of shots fired in this neighborhood in Mesa, Arizona. This is off of Ellsworth and Baseline Road. When police arrived, they discovered an absolute bloodbath. There were 5 people shot dead inside the house. Police determined that there were 3 different guns used to kill these 5 people. The victims were Tammy Lovell, Stephen Duffy, 18-year-old Shane Duffy, and Tammy Lovell's 2 children, Cassandra and Jacob. They were 10 and 15 years old. Police, of course, were suspicious of William Craig Miller because, Tammy and Stephen were the ones who were basically their main witnesses for the arson. And a week after the murders happened, he would call police and say that his rental home was burglarized. He told police, I think it was the same people who killed my 5 friends. However, they would recover guns from his home and ammunition. All of that would be forensically analyzed, and they determined that these were the same exact guns that were used to kill the 5 people. So William Craig Miller was arrested and charged with their murders. While all of that's happening, he finally agrees to plead guilty to the arson. He's sentenced to 16 years in prison. Then in 2011, he goes on trial for the murders. The prosecution would find witnesses that stated that he tried to hire hitmen to kill the family first before he did it himself. He was convicted on all 5 murders. William Craig Miller was sentenced to death. He is still awaiting his execution. The last time anyone would see him would be near this road, and that was 46 years ago. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Ronnie Odell Davis. Viewer discretion is advised. Ronnie Davis was born April 23rd, 1953, and he lived in the Valiant, Oklahoma area. Ronnie worked in rodeos. He did calf roping. Ronnie was basically described as being kind of your traditional cowboy. On August 24th, 1977, Ronnie went to work like normal, and then he left work. Then he would be going to an area that corralled his horses, and that was somewhere near this road. Ronnie, 24 years old at the time, he was never seen again. He never got home. He never showed up at work again. He just completely vanished. Ronnie did not have any known enemies. He hadn't had any grudges with anyone, hadn't gotten in any fights with anyone. Ronnie didn't do drugs. He didn't really drink. He was just sort of a good, normal dude. His family believes that there's no way he would just pick up and leave. I mean, he left all of his belongings back at home, like literally everything. The only thing missing other than him was his truck. This is not the exact truck, obviously, but he drove a 1975 Ford XLT, and the license plate number on that truck was 440-699, and it's never been seen since. Witnesses report seeing Ronnie's vehicle kind of near the corrals on this road. Those same witnesses say they also saw a blue and white Buick, and that Buick had a Texas license plate on it. The witnesses said they saw Ronnie get into his truck. The other 2 men were outside the truck and just stood there. One of them was kind of smiling, sort of creepily, and he was holding a rifle. But what happened after that is unknown. At the time of me making this video, it's been almost 46 years since he vanished. Now, his family suspects that someone may have used Ronnie's corral to store drugs like marijuana. Ronnie didn't do drugs, and so they believe that someone discovered that the drugs were stolen and at his corral, and so in some case of mistaken identity, they kidnapped and murdered Ronnie for thinking he took the drugs. Now, there's no physical evidence to say that's the case, but it is a pretty strong theory about what happened. If still alive, Ronnie would be about 70 years old today. If you have any information about the disappearance of Ronnie Odell Davis, please contact the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation at 1-800-522-8017. You can also email tips@osbi.ok.gov. Perhaps you can give this family some closure. Get your fucking paws off of me. I'm a hardened criminal. What? This is so dumb. Do you know how many people murdered? Yeah, no, that's true. Guilty! 55 years ago, a body was found in a suitcase, and to this very day, their identity is still unknown. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the West Alton Jane Doe. Viewer discretion is advised. It was February 1st, 1968 in West Alton, Missouri, specifically at the south end portion of the Clark Bridge, which was at Alton Lake. A fisherman was out fishing when all of a sudden his line caught on something that he realized was not a fish. It was extremely heavy, and he was finally able to pull it up. What he discovered was that it was a suitcase. Described as being kind of a cheaper suitcase. It was black. There was clothesline wrapped around the suitcase, and attached to it were some dumbbells. When he opened it, there was more dumbbells inside, but also something more horrific. There was the body of a very young child, basically folded up and just smushed into this suitcase. The autopsy would show that she was likely dead for about maybe 3 weeks to a month. There wasn't any obvious signs of trauma, but there also was some decomposition going on too. There wasn't any water in her lungs, so they figured she likely was not drowned. They believe the nameless little girl was likely 2 or maybe 3 years old. She was just 2 feet 8 inches tall and weighed about 35 to maybe 40 pounds. She had very long strawberry blonde hair. She had a scar above her eye. They noticed one odd thing, that one of her teeth was like abnormally large, so that could help with identifying her. She was also nude except for just a pair of white underwear. A few weeks after this was put out in the news, a man came forward to say he thinks that Jane Doe might be his daughter, who had gone missing about 8 weeks prior, who also went missing with one of her siblings and the mother. But they were somehow able to rule this scenario out, and she was not his little girl. I don't know if there's an update on that family. I haven't looked into that family yet. In 2015, they did exhume her body. The hopes, with modern day technology and with forensic genealogy, they were going to be able to extract some DNA to plug into a system to see if they can track down relatives. But unfortunately, they were not able to obtain a large enough sample from her remains. 55 years later, the only name they have for her is West Alton Jane Doe. Police are still hoping someone can identify her. If you have any information, please call 636-949-1818. It's been nearly 16 years and police are still wondering who put her in that crawl space. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Leah Hickman. Viewer discretion is advised. Leah Nicole Hickman was born on November 22nd, 1986, and she lived most of her life in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Leah, pictured here with her father, her dream in life was to become a TV news reporter. She was someone who kind of had like that star quality personality. She was just a very outgoing individual. She was just always smiling, always happy, always in a good mood. By December of 2007, she is a junior at Marshall University there in West Virginia, where she is studying journalism. Her and her sister lived here in this apartment building. The last time that Leah's sister Jessica recalls seeing her was on December 14th, 2007. Later on, during the investigation, police would look at her computer and determine that she was logged into her computer on December 14th, actually accessing MySpace. They then learned that after that, Leah decided to go to a nearby McDonald's, which later they would find the receipt to prove that. Now, her sister was kind of doing her own thing outside the apartment, which was normal. But when she got back to the apartment the following day, she noticed that Leah's purse was there, her car keys were there, but Leah was nowhere to be found. So she goes down to the parking lot and notices that Leah's car is also still there. And because they can't find her anywhere, by December 16th, they report her missing. For the next week or so, they search the entire area looking for her. They interview all of her friends, her fellow students, faculty, everyone and anyone she knows, and they come up with nothing. And then a week after she disappeared, on December 21st, 2007, she was found in her apartment building. Her body was discovered shoved in a crawl space. I guess the crawl space could be accessed by literally anyone, and you could reach it through the laundry room, which the entire building shared. Now, there were only 4 apartments in this building, and only 2 of them had any occupants. One of the apartments being Leah and her sister. The other was occupied by a man, but when they investigated him, they determined that there was no way he could possibly have anything to do with her murder. Police thought, well, this had to be someone she knew, right? But they couldn't find any leads that way either. Her cause of death was she was strangled to death, which is usually a pretty personal way to kill someone. It could still imply it was done by someone that knew her, but who that person is to this very day is still unknown. They did collect DNA and hair fibers from her body, but they've never matched anyone in the system. They have no suspects, they have no witnesses, and now they still wonder who killed Leah Hickman. If you have information on the murder of Leah Hickman, please call 304-696-4420. One police officer would say that this is the worst case that I have ever seen. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Mabel Leyshon. Viewer discretion is advised. 90-year-old Mabel lived here in this house in... I don't know how to say literally any of that. Well, I guess it's in Anglesey, which is an island in Wales. At the time of this case, 90-year-old Mabel is deaf and she is partially blind. But she was still described as someone as being very lively and was just a very active person in the community. She was very well loved. It was November 25th, 2001. Police were notified by a Meals on Wheels volunteer who had gone to Mabel's home, knocked on the door, but Mabel did not answer. The volunteer also noticed a broken window. When the police arrived and entered the house, they saw something that you can only think would happen in a nightmare. The 90-year-old woman was slumped in her chair, covered head to toe in blood. They determined later she had been stabbed 22 times. There was also a 9-inch circular wound in her chest, and her heart had been removed. At her feet was a saucepan on top of a silver tray. The saucepan had the heart wrapped up in some paper and also had a lot of blood in it. That saucepan also had lip marks on the side. It indicated to them that someone had tried to drink her blood. The lip marks were in blood. And then near her was a candlestick and then 2 fire pokers which were positioned to form a cross. And then I guess there was a lit candle on the mantle. The scene was horrific. The detectives said this is the worst case that I've ever seen. To them, it looked like some kind of ritual had taken place. Several days into the investigation, police caught a break. They found 17-year-old Matthew Hardman. He lived in that same neighborhood, that area. Well, someone came forward to say that one time he had a German foreign exchange student at his residence. Matthew asked that exchange student to bite him because he thought it would turn him into a vampire. So the cops were called, and then he asked one of the cops to bite him on the neck. So now fast forward to the murder of Mabel, he sounds like the right person for this, given the ritualistic nature of things. He gave police his alibi, but they were quickly able to squash his entire alibi and he was lying. They searched his computer history and they found a ton of searches about vampires, cults, human sacrifices, rituals, and dark arts. And then DNA left on that saucepan that wasn't Mabel's matched him. This was him when they arrested him and charged him with her murder, which he always denied. They had his DNA. They also found a shoe impression by the crime scene, and it matched one of his shoes. When they searched his home, they found a coat, and in that coat, it had a knife. There was blood on that knife. That blood matched Mabel Leyshon. And then his obsession with the dark arts and rituals and vampirism, he was clearly their guy. He would go on trial in 2002, where he was found guilty of the murder. He would be sentenced to, from what I understand, life in prison, but he has to serve at least 12 of those years in order to qualify for early release or parole. Now, maybe someone from the area can correct me if they know this, but I did read that I think in 2017 or so, because of some human rights court hearing about if some killer should be facing life in prison, if that's, inhumane, that I guess, from what I understand, and I could be wrong about this, that he was then basically told that he would be serving the rest of his life in prison. Because as far as I know, he's still in prison. But again, maybe someone in the area who knows firsthand accounts of this may know better. But there isn't a lot of information on it. But at least the monster who did that horrific thing to this elderly woman who was just sitting down watching TV, at least, hopefully, he will never be able to hurt anyone ever again. This is another worst deaths imaginable. Viewer discretion is advised. Pictured here was 41-year-old Suzanne Hart. She was an ad executive at Young and Rubicam. She worked in this building at 285 Madison Avenue, and this is in New York City. Suzanne was described as a fantastic woman. She was at a point in her life when she had everything going for her. But sadly, her life would end in a very horrific way. Suzanne was working at her building on December 14th, 2011, just a couple weeks before Christmas. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning. Suzanne was heading into an elevator where 2 other people had just gotten on. As she was stepping on to the elevator, there was a malfunction. The elevator doors were still open as she walked in, but then it shot up on its own, with the door still open. This caused Suzanne to fall halfway into the elevator. The people inside described it as shooting up like a bullet. With half of her body still kind of on the outside and her other half on the inside. As the elevator shot up, she got dragged in between the elevator and the wall. So she is being crushed and dragged against the inner walls of the elevator, all while 2 people are forced to stare at this happening. The elevator would drag Suzanne up, I think, at least 1 floor, maybe 2. But she was being crushed with a massive amount of force. Firefighters arrived within minutes of them calling 911. They tried to rescue her, but it was already far too late. Suzanne was pronounced dead at the scene. The other 2 individuals were not harmed physically, but they were rushed to the hospital because of psychological issues. They witnessed something that would scar them for the rest of their lives. The investigation would lead them to some information. The building had about 13 elevators. Everyone referred to the elevators as creaky and scary. In an 11-year span, those elevators got 56 violations. They uncovered that very day, maintenance people had been doing work on that elevator. They had disabled the lock that prevents the elevator from operating with its door still open. When they were done with the repair, they failed to re-lock that. So New York City suspended the license of the people who, I guess, operate these elevators and maintain them. They were slapped with 23 violations and a fine of about $120,000. The maintenance man who failed to relock that lock, he was fired, but I don't see that criminal charges were ever filed. He has publicly said that this incident has now haunted him forever. Hello, true crimerers. Hey, let's take a look at some weird or maybe silly laws from around the world. Hey, I'm also using a flat earth map so that I can possibly reach out to and appeal to the lunatics of the flat world. And I will link the article where I got these from in the comments below. It's illegal to chew gum in Singapore. Apparently, a bunch of numbskulls used chewed up bubblegum to vandalize the mass rapid transit system, and so they ruined it for the rest of Singapore. So in 1992, they banned all gum, unless it's for therapeutic or medical reasons, like nicotine gum. Hey, don't run out of gas on the Autobahn in Germany. There in Germany, they say, guess what? You should be smart enough to know how much gas you have before you get on, the Autobahn. So don't be dumb and make sure you got a full tank of gas. You'll get fined if you run out of gas on the Autobahn, and then you'll be fined again if you walk to the gas station. You don't fuck around in Germany. Don't you dare feed pigeons in Venice, Italy. Well, because people wanted to feed them, and so they kept shitting all over the place. The cleanup was astronomical. Now, how'd they get a picture of me? Well, in Greece, it is illegal to wear high-heeled shoes at the Acropolis. Those ruins are 2,500 years old, and these little high-heeled things are like sharp little daggers, potentially causing some damage to the ruins, so don't fucking do that. Don't wear a Winnie the Pooh shirt in Poland. Oh, bother. That was bad. This is because I guess the authorities there found Winnie the Pooh and his attire to be a little too scandalous. Probably because he's not wearing any pants, which is potentially exposing his little bear junk. I mean, they're not wrong. Why is he wearing a shirt but no pants, creep? Okay, speaking of no pants, men must wear Speedos on French beaches. Oui, oui. Literally. Apparently, it's required for men to wear Speedos because, not for safety reasons, but I guess rather they not walk around town in a Speedo. I guess they don't like loose clothing or something. What? Well, if you're going to British Parliament, don't pack your suit of armor because, well, you're not allowed to wear those. That's a law that dates back to 1313. That's back when I was in 2nd grade. I remember this law, yeah. It's illegal to ride a cow while drunk in Scotland. So I guess that means always then, right? Don't you dare take a selfie with Buddha in Sri Lanka. It's a sign of disrespect. And you can be imprisoned for it. It's illegal to fly kites in Victoria, Australia. You're required to stop if it bothers someone. A law for Karens. Huh. A man calmly walks into a police station in Washington state and says, I just killed my wife and daughter. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Kristi and Violet Holmes. Viewer discretion is advised. 41-year-old Kristi Holmes was born on November 1st, 1970 in Texas. She would go on to get married and have a daughter. That marriage would end in divorce, and then she would get remarried. She would marry Dean Holmes, and they lived in the Spanaway, Washington area. I guess this is somewhere near Tacoma. The two of them would have a daughter together, and her name was Violet. She was born on September 19th, 2000. Violet was someone who adored her father and her mother. She was described as a cuddle bug, someone who loved her laptop, and that she was just the love of everyone's life. Kristi was someone who was always trying to take care of others. Her actual job was helping the chronically mentally ill. She also provided in-home daycare. She was a really awesome mom, and this family appeared to be your normal, typical family. But on August 28th, 2012, normalcy went out the window. It was Wednesday, August 29th, 2012. Dean Holmes walks into the local Spanaway, Washington Police Department and says, I've just murdered my wife and my daughter. Police go to their home, and unfortunately, they confirm it's true. Kristi and 11-year-old Violet were laying on the same bed. Both had appeared to be shot to death. When asked why he did this, Dean said he had been hiding financial problems from his wife for quite some time, that he had a significant amount of debt. This is just one of his debts. Dean said at 6 o'clock in the morning on August 28th, he woke up and he shot his wife while she was in bed. Violet didn't hear it. Violet was actually having a sleepover there at the house with a friend. So he woke her up and the friend. He put them both in his vehicle. He drove the friend home with Violet in his truck. He then pulls off to the side of the road somewhere desolate, and completely unaware of anything that had gone on, Dean takes out his gun and he shoots his 11-year-old daughter dead there in the truck. He then brings her back to the house, unloads her out of the truck, and puts her in bed with her mother. He then goes around the house to do some cleaning, goes to a fast food restaurant, gets a little bite to eat, then walks into the police station to say he killed his wife and daughter. He was too much of a chicken shit to just tell his wife we're having some financial problems. So he just killed everyone instead. He would plead guilty instead of going to trial. Dean Holmes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 1 minute he was playing Grand Theft Auto 4, the next, he had killed someone. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Marie Smothers. Viewer discretion is advised. 87-year-old Marie Smothers lived here in this home in Slaughter, Louisiana. I can't find a confirmed photo of Marie, so I don't want to put anything up. It may not be her. The 87-year-old was a grandmother, and at the time of this story, she was essentially the caregiver to her 8-year-old grandson. The two of them lived in the home, and they even shared the same bedroom together. They were very, very close. Everything about their relationship was described as incredibly loving. He loved her with all his heart, and she doted upon him. It was August of 2013. The grandmother and her grandson were enjoying a quiet day inside the house. The little boy, who was 8 years old, was allowed to play Grand Theft Auto 4. That day, he was sitting on the couch playing the game. His grandma, I guess, was in the other room watching TV. Obviously, the game is rated M for mature because it has a lot of violence, a lot of gratuity. But some people know their own kids, their grandkids, and know what they can handle, apparently. All of a sudden, as the 8-year-old boy is playing the game, he puts the controller down. He then picks up a .38 caliber handgun that he knows is in the house and apparently is not secured. He walks up to his grandma, puts the gun to the back of her head, and pulls the trigger. He fires a single shot through her head, which kills her instantly. The gun was owned by Marie. The boy's father even said the gun was owned by Marie. When police would finally arrive, he said that he accidentally shot her, but after further questioning and realizing the game he was playing, and they asked him some more questions, and they realized that he actually did it intentionally. The 8-year-old boy thought that it was a toy gun he was using, and he was basically trying to imitate the game he was playing. He thought he was just playing another version of the game. After a thorough investigation, police would actually not file any charges. Under Louisiana law, anyone under the age of 10, you are exempt from criminal responsibility. So, he was released back into the custody of his family. And I know normally I say, kids deserve the same punishment adults get, but there's a difference between a child who is aware of what they're doing and they know what they're doing and they know that what they're doing is wrong, and then a kid who thinks they're playing, a kid who doesn't understand what's going on. Please secure your guns, for God's sakes. This was an absolute tragedy. Hello, true crimerers. There is a true crime breaking news update. There has been an arrest in the Long Island serial killer case. If you want to see the information about the case, go ahead and click the comment and it'll take you to my video about it. Long Island serial killer, also referred to as L.I.S.K, also referred to as the Gilgo Beach murders. Police have allegedly identified the actual killer. A 59-year-old architect from Manhattan. Rex Heuermann, that better not be me in 20 years. Well, he was arrested earlier today, July 14th, 2023. This comes roughly a decade or so after about 10 bodies were found, basically at Gilgo Beach. The information on this is still pretty fresh, it's still incoming, so there isn't a ton of details as of this point. But they have been at the Massapequa home of 59-year-old Rex Heuermann, and they've been collecting evidence. The prosecutors in the area say they expect an indictment to come down officially either today, possibly tomorrow. But it does sound like this is the guy, that this is the Long Island serial killer. Hopefully we'll find out more soon about how they got to him. And hopefully, if he truly is the Gilgo Beach killer, L.I.S.K, Long Island serial killer, hopefully they have enough evidence to put him away for the rest of his life. But again, it's all allegedly until proven guilty in a court of law. I'm sure more will come soon. A javelin would be the cause of one of the worst freak accidents. Viewer discretion is advised. This particular story took place at Liverpool College, which is in England, and it happened in 1999. 41-year-old married father of two, John Desborough, was doing an athletics class there. He himself was also a teacher. Now, apparently John that day was actually teaching 11 and 12-year-olds how to properly throw a javelin. So he threw his javelin through the air, and then it landed in the ground and it was still pointing up. John would then run towards the javelin with the intent of just grabbing it and taking it out of the ground, when he accidentally slipped and tripped and fell face first into the javelin. When he fell into it, he fell into the blunt end of the javelin. It pierced his eye socket and went all the way into and through his brain, and partially damaged his skull. The students would run to the street and flag down someone to try to call an ambulance, which they got one, and they rushed John to the hospital. Sadly, John was basically in a coma from the get-go, and they were never able to get him to come to. Approximately 3 weeks after he ended up in the hospital from the incident, he would get a chest infection, and this would ultimately lead to his death, which they would later attribute to respiratory distress syndrome, which was due to the extreme head injury. John's wife, understandably, and many other people would question why on earth they're even teaching javelin throwing to 11 and 12-year-olds, but Unfortunately, it happened, and this would lead to a man's brutal death. A freak accident in its truest form. A missing Seattle woman would be found in several trash cans. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Ingrid Lyne. Viewer discretion is advised. Ingrid Lyne was born on August 2nd, 1975, and that was near Renton, Washington. She would later go on to get married, and she had 3 wonderful daughters. Then she and her husband gotten divorced. Lynne had actually attended school in Arizona, and that's where she got her nursing degree. And then she would move back to Washington. And it was there she got a job as a nurse at Seattle's Swedish Medical Center. She was described as a wonderful woman, and she absolutely loved her daughters. But sadly, they now have to grow up without their mother. On April 9th, 2016, Ingrid's ex-husband would arrive at her home with the 3 kids. He was there to drop them off as they had pre-planned. But the door was locked and she wasn't answering. So he called Ingrid's mom and asked her if she'd heard from her. The mom said no. So her mom goes to the house and she basically goes inside. She sees that Ingrid's wallet, her purse, her cell phone are all still there, but Ingrid is not. She uses the cell phone to text one of the last people that Ingrid was talking to, a man named John Charlton. He was a homeless man who was also a day laborer. According to him, he and Ingrid had met about a month prior through a dating app. He said he had slept at her house a couple of times. So the mom texts him through Ingrid's phone and says, "When did you last see her?" He said they had gone to a Seattle Mariners game that night, and then he said they went back to the house and he got so drunk that he doesn't remember what happened. His memory is just gone. Police enter the home after she's reported missing, and they find some very concerning things. They found a saw in her bathroom. There was blood and there was human tissue as well. And they found trash bags. As that's happening, people have discovered something horrific in a few recycling bins. Trash bags full of human body parts. Severed head, arms, legs. Eventually, at 3 different locations, they find remains, which would later be identified to 40-year-old Ingrid Lyne. Because she had been dismembered, her cause of death was not exactly figured out. Police learned that John Charlton had a detailed criminal past. He had a criminal record in 6 states. Aggravated robbery, grand theft auto, assault, larceny. He denied having anything to do with her murder. He had injuries all over his body, like someone was fighting him. He would end up pleading guilty to the murder. Why he did it? It's not really known. He was given 28 years. A family in Virginia is currently asking for your help to help find their missing loved one. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Jake Fahlfeder. Viewer discretion is advised. Jake Fahlfeder is 31 years old, and he, worked in Arlington, Virginia. He works here at the Bronson Beer Hall in Arlington. Well, on July 20th, 2023, not that long ago, he failed to show up for his shift. Now, his mom texted him on July 18th, 2023, and at some point that day, she did not get any responses back from him. So she said in a text to him, "If you don't respond to me by tonight, I'm reporting you missing." Because I guess he lived with her. And it was very unlike him not to respond to her, not to call, not to say like, "Hey, I'm going to be late." So she felt something was off pretty much immediately. I guess visually, he was last seen on the evening of July 18th, 2023. I guess specifically in Ruckersville, Virginia. But then from there, no one's seen him. Jake, pictured here with his mom, just seems to have fallen off the face of the earth completely. So they began searching the areas for him, and they've come up with nothing so far. Except here on Waldrop Road, which appears to be in a pretty wooded area, next to, I'm not sure what business this is, but Jake's vehicle was found parked on the side of the road. And this is in Gordonsville, Virginia, where the car was found. I guess it's approximately 13 miles from where he was last seen in Ruckersville. They didn't notice anything suspicious in the vehicle, but he certainly wasn't in it. Now, if I'm understanding this news article correctly, there was reportedly a sighting of Jake this recent Tuesday, the 25th of July. I guess someone matching his description was last seen leaving an unoccupied house in the 11,000 block of Louisa Road in Louisa County. But when police arrived to that area after getting the tip, he was not there, so they searched the area by drone. They also used dogs, and they just searched themselves on foot, but they found absolutely no trace of him. And that is where we are left. Jake has not been seen since. No one has reported any significant tips, at least none that have been put out in the news. And now his family is just wanting anyone to give any information they may have. Anything that would help lead to finding Jake. The police have not commented on if they think that foul play was involved. They have not commented on if this is a criminal investigation, just simply that he is missing. If you have any information about Jake Fahlfeder, please call 757-505-0567. You can be anonymous as well. A killer convinced people he was reformed. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Jack Unterweger. Viewer discretion is advised. Jack Unterweger, he was born on August 16th, 1950 in Austria. Jack's father was actually an American who served in the U.S. military. His mother, by some accounts, was a sex worker. She had been arrested, I guess, numerous times. It got to a point where eventually he basically had to end up living with his grandparents. Growing up, he committed a lot of petty crimes, which he was in and out of jail for. And this was close to 20 different convictions. In 1974, he met an 18-year-old West German girl named Margaret Schaefer. He would go on to sexually assault and murder her. He strangled her with a bra, her bra. He was fairly quickly apprehended for the murder. He was charged with the murder, and then he was convicted. And for that murder, he was sentenced to a minimum of 15 years. While in prison, he allegedly wrote a book called Purgatory. This was basically years into his sentence. In this book, he claimed that he was a reformed killer. He has changed his ways. He's learned his mistakes. He was a new man, and he wanted to get out and educate youth, especially the young men, on how to better their lives. He actually convinced people that this was authentic. There were a lot of people in Austria who believed him and were trying to get him pardoned. But the Austrian president was like, no. In 1990, he served his minimum 15 years and was granted parole. By 1991, he was hired by an Austrian magazine and wanted him to write articles about crime and murder in Los Angeles. So he would travel to Los Angeles and spent a good time at the infamous Hotel Cecil. He was supposed to especially work alongside the sex workers of the area. Maybe not such a good idea. While he was out doing that and promoting his books, police in Czechoslovakia, they discovered through investigations that Jack had murdered a woman there named Blanka Bakova. And then in Vienna, Austria, they were investigating more murders that had happened in 1990, shortly after Jack was released from prison. All of these women died pretty much the exact same way. They were all strangled to death with their own bras, which is exactly how Jack Unterweger killed his first victim in 1974. While in Los Angeles, 3 sex workers in the area near Hotel Cecil were also murdered, killed by being strangled with their own bra. It's reported Jack Unterweger killed between 12 to 15 women, all after he was reformed and released. He was arrested again in Austria and charged with 9 total murders, but then he hung himself in his jail cell. A game of hide and seek would end in one of the worst deaths imaginable. Viewer discretion is advised. This was 14-year-old Miguel Martinez, and he lived in Lubbock, Texas. He was born on February 17th, 1999. At the time of the story, he was attending Cavazos Junior High. He was very active in sports, and he wanted to become a football player. He actually had a goal of getting a football scholarship when he attended high school, something he was really excited for. Even though he only lived for 14 years, he was loved by absolutely everyone who came into contact with him. He had a lot of friends who loved him dearly. It was June of 2013. Miguel was with some friends and family at the National Ranching Center, which is located at Texas Tech University, and it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. He and his friends were playing a game of hide and seek. Obviously, with it being 3 o'clock in the morning, it's very, very dark outside and there isn't much lighting. As Miguel was running towards a hiding spot, trying to find one, around each statue are these like little lights. As Miguel was running towards this direction, he tripped over one of those lights and he actually flew onto one of the horns of one of these bulls. And sadly, his chest was impaled by one of the horns. So 911 was obviously called the moment everyone realized what happened. And one of Miguel's friends, who said that Miguel was basically like a brother to him, would literally hold on to Miguel on this statue, trying to comfort him until the ambulance arrived. He told Miguel he loved him, and he said he just held on tight. Miguel was alive for at least a few more minutes, but when the ambulance arrived, he would be pronounced dead at the scene. So I guess what we could take away from this is if you're ever going to be out in a location that's going to be pretty dark, you know, we all have cell phones now with flashlights built into them. Definitely make sure you're using those flashlights, because obviously you don't know what could happen. Simply tripping over something could end your life. I hope Miguel is resting comfortably in peace. A man who was in the middle of committing a mass shooting would call his ex-girlfriend and make her listen. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Peter Selis. Viewer discretion is advised. Peter was a 49-year-old man who lived in San Diego, California. He used to work at Massey Ford, a car dealership. While working there, he met some people, and later down the road, he would be invited to a birthday party from one of his former coworkers. Peter was described as a very average dude, laid back, decent sense of humor. He always seemed like a good guy. That all changed on April 30th, 2017. So the birthday party was being held at the La Jolla Crossroads in San Diego, and it was being held here at the pool area. Everyone was swimming, barbecuing, having a good time. There was about 25, maybe 30 people there. This is an actual image from that day. This is Peter Selis sitting in a lounge chair. Just minutes from this moment, he will be dead. You see, in one hand, he's holding a beer, the other hand, a handgun. A couple of guests noticed he took out the handgun and put it on his lap. He then casually got up and began to fire at people at the party. He didn't say a word to any of them. He gave no indication. Over the next 3 to 4 minutes or so, he managed to shoot 7 people, 6 of whom would later be rushed to the hospital and they would survive. But sadly, one did not. 35-year-old mother of 3, Monique Clark, was killed. Monique Clark was actually a childhood friend of Nick Cannon, and he was devastated when he heard the news. Now, 911 was called by multiple people at 6:06 p.m. Police arrived within minutes. They approached Peter Selis, who lifted his gun towards them, and they fired upon him. Peter Selis was shot dead there at the scene. Initially, they thought this may have been racially motivated, because all of the victims were either black or Hispanic. When a white guest tried to help a black individual who had been shot, Peter told that white person, "Go away or else you'll be shot." But then he would fire at anyone who was black or Hispanic trying to help. But they still don't know if this was actually racially motivated, and they never will know. Witnesses said that as Peter was walking around firing his gun calmly, he picked up his cell phone, called his ex-girlfriend, and he told her to listen to the screams of the people he was shooting. They discovered that Peter Selis had recently gone through a bad breakup with the ex-girlfriend. He had filed for bankruptcy. He had over $100,000 in debt. And the fact that he called his ex-girlfriend to make her listen, police believe that that was truly the motive for what he did. He was pissed off over a breakup, and he was financially screwed. Yo, is this real? I need to know right now if this is real. This is, I guess, from the Jumbotron at Coors Field at a Rockies game. Here's some fun little game notes. Using a stethoscope to listen to the heart, cardiologists can detect narrow valves, valve leakage, and or abnormal rhythm. Okay? But don't bother asking him to check your heart, though, Becky. That crushed Titanic sub has more life inside it than that collapsed troll cave you call a chest cavity. Who the fuck is Becky? God damn. Becky sounds like a real bitch. I think the scoreboard guy is having a really, really bad day today. Becky really did that guy wrong somehow, some way. Jesus Christ. I love it. Fucking Becky. It sounds like, at least in the scoreboard operator's eyes, Becky's heart will not be going on. He wanted to see if a video game scenario could be just as easy in real life. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Polwat Chino. Viewer discretion is advised. This particular case takes us to Bangkok, Thailand. Bangkok. Now, Grand Theft Auto is one of the most popular video game series on the planet. The series has sold somewhere around 330 million copies, Grand Theft Auto 5 being the most popular. But this particular case was inspired by Grand Theft Auto 4. As I'm sure many of you know, these are games where you can basically run around the city and rob whoever you want to rob, yank people out of their cars and kill them or run them over or whatever. It's a video game series known for its gratuitous violence. Now, it should be said that most people who play these types of video games leave it at just the video game. But one particular teenager could not do that. This is the only photo from this case I can actually find, and I believe that this is Polwat Chino right there. In the summer of 2008, Polwat would play Grand Theft Auto, and then he got an idea. He wanted to see if it was just as easy to rob a taxi driver as it was in the GTA games. So he flags down a cab being driven by 54-year-old Kwan Po Keng. The teenager then has him drive to his destination, but instead of paying his fare, this is when he wanted to see if robbing a taxi driver was as easy as the game. So he pulls out a knife and threatens the driver, but then he just stabs him. Not once or twice, he stabs him 10 times. He then takes the body, puts it in the back seat of the cab, and he begins to drive the cab recklessly backwards. This kid had never driven before. He had no idea how to drive. So he crashed. He would be arrested by police, and he told them, quote, "Killing seemed easy in the game," end quote. He told police that he was absolutely beyond obsessed with Grand Theft Auto. His parents had to constantly give him money to play it, apparently at some kind of like internet cafe or something. When police asked, why did you stab him if that wasn't your intention? He said the driver was starting to fight back when he was robbing him, so he decided to stab him. He said he chose him because of his age. Thailand would then request that copies of the video game be taken off the shelves. Now, in terms of Polwat Chino, he was charged with the murder and the potential sentence would have been death by lethal injection. However, I can't seem to find any updates on the case. I see a bunch of stories talking about the initial story, but I don't know what his sentence was, or if he was convicted. Anyone in the area by chance know? A space shuttle simulator ride at a theme park in China would have a catastrophic and deadly accident. Hello, true crimeers. This is another Deaths at Theme Parks. Viewer discretion is advised. The theme park is located in overseas Chinese town East, which is in Shenzhen. One of the rides that they had there was called Space Journey. The concept was that you were going to be pretending like you were on a space shuttle going into space and traversing the universe. It's one of those indoor rides that has like an 80-foot like screen. Kind of like, you know, Star Tours and the old Back to the Future ride at Universal Studios. So there are these little cabins which can hold 4 people each, and this whole thing essentially spins and kind of goes up and down while you're looking at the visuals, so it's simulating like you're, you know, out there in space. Well, in June of 2010, all 11 of the carriages were full of people. The ride had been functioning just fine all day long and had had no issues previous to this. When the survivors of the incident said they all of a sudden saw like a power cut and then heard a loud explosion and possibly like a scraping sound. So basically what happened was the pods carrying the people, something malfunctioned and the entire thing collapsed in a free fall and it fell 50 feet. This is a video simulation of what they say they think happened. It's pretty freaking fast. See, then it scrapes along the walls and then it fell. Yeah. Needless to say, this was an absolute disaster. They were lucky that more people didn't actually get injured, but there was still a pretty large toll. 10 people were severely injured from the fall, but sadly 6 people would lose their lives because of the fall. You know, when you're in this metal pod that's basically spinning super fast and all of a sudden you free fall 50 feet, landing on the hard surface below, that's a pretty horrific way to go. The investigation into it said that there was not any human error in this, that it was some kind of mechanical malfunction. From what I understand, the ride itself obviously closed permanently, but I do not know if there were any lawsuits filed and or if money was awarded. Usually there is money rewarded in situations like this, but also usually that stuff is kept pretty private. But falling 50 feet in a metal box going that fast, that had to be absolutely horrific. This is the last known photo a man took just before he vanished. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Aidan Roche. Viewer discretion is advised. 29-year-old Aidan Roche is from Middlesbrough in England, and he is definitely known as an adventurer. He's an avid hiker, a camper. Back in 2020, he actually bought himself an RV camper, and he was planning to go to the Swiss Alps, but because of the pandemic, he had to hold off. He was finally able to go in June of this year, 2023. His trip would take him to the Eiger Trail, which is in the Swiss Alps. I guess it's in the Grindelwald area. Whenever he was out on a camping trip or a hiking adventure, he would always send photos and videos to his friends and family, like constant photo dump. So on June 22nd, 2023, when his friends and family hadn't gotten anything from him in a little while, they were pretty concerned. He was doing this particular trip alone. It was scheduled to be about 2 weeks, and he was about halfway through that. This is the final photo that he took and sent to his friends and family. And now I'm going to play you the final videos he sent, which I got from someone on here who asked me to talk about this story. I'll tag her video below.
Here's a few of the last videos he sent people before we lost contact with him completely. We need to find the woman in this video, and as you'll see, there's some people in the next video.
Village where you start from.
So as you can see, there's 2 people in front of him there walking towards him, and then there's also 3 people behind him walking towards him again. We need to get in touch with these people to find out which way he was walking. This is the last video I'm aware of. If you've got any videos like...
So it was this woman here, these folks here, and then these folks here. They're not in any kind of trouble. They just want to know if they saw anything or can tell anyone about what may have happened to him. They just want to try to retrace his steps, because Aidan has not been seen since. This is now over a month ago, and there's been no sight of him. He was reported missing. The authorities there searched by helicopter. They obviously searched by foot. They did find his RV camper, but there was no signs of like anything had been done there for a while. And that camper has now been brought back to the UK. But they still have found no trace of Aidan. The authorities did search really thoroughly. The fear is he may have injured himself or worse. He had very few rations on his person. The family has set up a GoFundMe to help continue the search, which I'll link in my link tree. They just want to find him. hopefully alive, but they just want to bring him home. He was supposed to walk into a grocery store, but instead, he's never been seen since. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Ben Roseland. Viewer discretion is advised. This story takes place in Clinton, Iowa, which is just off the Mississippi River. And this is 19-year-old Ben Roseland. Ben was attending Clinton County Community College. He lived at home with his parents and his two sisters. He was described as a really good kid who made some unfortunate mistakes, but he always owned up to his mistakes. He was doing really well in school. He paid for his own college education. Ben was just described as a really happy guy. But then, on February 9th, 2008, Ben would vanish. At approximately 10:45 p.m. that night, Ben was over at his friend's apartment. Ben was feeling like getting a snack, so he said, I'm gonna go head over to the store and go grab a bite to eat. He said he was going to be walking to the Hy-Vee store, and then he would be back in just a few minutes. It was literally just like a few minute walk. But after like an hour or two, when Ben didn't come home, his friends were a little concerned. They informed Ben's parents, and they were concerned. So they would report Ben missing. Unfortunately, the police considered this to be just another teenage runaway, and they didn't take it seriously for about 3 weeks. At that point, they began to comb the entire area. They were searching high and low, they were searching by helicopter. There were rumors abound that maybe Ben was a victim of the infamous smiley face killer. Because of those rumors, they would comb the nearby Mississippi River, but they never found his remains in the water. They never found him anywhere. And they did a very thorough search. Some people said, well, maybe Ben is running away from his problems. What problem is that? Well, back in November of 2007, Ben got involved in a pretty serious car accident. No one was killed. Ben was seriously injured. The person in the other car was injured, but nowhere near as bad as Ben. Ben was not supposed to be driving. He had his license revoked. So people said, maybe because of this upcoming trial, he planned to up and leave. The problem is, Ben had already spent his own money on a lawyer, and everyone involved said he was probably not going to be spending any time in actual jail. Then, they found a pair of shoes during a search. They were these camouflage shoes that were confirmed to be worn by him the night he vanished. His parents also confirmed they were his. They brought in scent dogs to see if they can track his scent, but they didn't pick up on anything. The shoes were found in 2 different locations, and at that point it indicated potential foul play. However, they don't have evidence to suggest he had been killed, so this is still just a missing persons case. This is an age progression photo of what he may look like today. If you have any information about the disappearance of Ben Roseland, please call 563-243-1458. On November 21st, 1980, the deadliest disaster in Nevada's history would occur. Hello, true crimerers. This is the story of the MGM Grand Fire. Viewer discretion is advised. This was the MGM Grand as it stood in 1980. It's located on the Strip in Las Vegas, Nevada. On November 21st, 1980, there were roughly 5,000 people inside, either in the hotel portion, the casinos, or one of the numerous restaurants. At 7:07 a.m. in the deli, which is a restaurant inside the hotel, a fire would break out. It started off as a little flicker of flames that then very rapidly spread. Within moments, the fire began to spread at a rate of about 15 feet per second. Smoke began to billow out of the AC vents. It was at 7:17 a.m. when firefighters were first called, and they had arrived by 7:19 a.m. By this time, a fireball had shot through and burst through the entrance to the hotel. It took only 6 minutes for the entire casino floor to be engulfed in flames. 18 people would end up being caught in the casino and would die. Even though the fire was maintained to one floor, the smoke had billowed throughout the entire building, and especially in the stairwells and in the elevators. Later on, 10 people would be found deceased in one of those elevators. They had become trapped. Hotel guests were trapped in their rooms. They were breaking through the windows, waving towels to alert first responders that they needed help. Some people managed to get ropes and lower themselves down. One individual jumped from the building would die from fracturing their skull. The smoke and the fire could be seen all over the Strip. This was a catastrophic nightmare, and it happened within moments. Helicopters were attempting to rescue people from the roof, while firefighters below were trying to contain the fire, but the damage was extremely severe. The entire casino floor was annihilated, burnt to the ground. It's just still unbelievable how quickly it happened. 650 people were severely injured in the fire. A lot from smoke inhalation, from being punctured by shattered glass, and some by the fire itself. 85 people were killed. The majority of them were actually in the upper floors. They had become trapped in the billowing smoke. Most of those people died in the stairwells, primarily from smoke inhalation, and also carbon monoxide poisoning. They determined that the fire started from a recently installed display case in the restaurant. There was some issuing with the wiring. They would also later discover dozens of safety infractions. Dozens of lawsuits were settled, and the hotel was eventually rebuilt. Two people are murdered on an island, and the man in prison for it swears he had nothing to do with it. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Freddie Duberly and Mary Lou Holmes. Viewer discretion is advised. So this case aired on Unsolved Mysteries, and even the show itself did not have any photos of the victims, which is very unusual, but I can't find any either. It was the night of April 16th, 1978, and this is Honeymoon Island, which is located near Clearwater, Florida. This was the destination of three friends who were going there to party and celebrate the birth of one of their grandchildren. Those three people were Freddie Duberly, Mary Lou Holmes, and Glenn Consagra. This is his actual photo. According to Glenn, the three of them boarded a little boat and would be on their way to Honeymoon Island, but the boat began to break down. So they tried to land on the nearest embankment, which was this little island here. It was late and they figured, let's just party here. Glenn says that Freddie and Mary Lou began to argue, so he went his own separate way on the island and ended up falling asleep, when he was suddenly jolted awake by the sound of gunshots and then a boat speeding away. When he got back to the campsite, Mary Lou and Freddie were gone, and the campsite appeared to be just in shambles. He also couldn't find the boat they came in on, so he jumped in the water and swam back to the pier they took off from. Initially, he told people that Freddie and Mary Lou had just taken the boat and they were supposed to buy beer, but they never came back for him. A few days later, the Coast Guard found the bodies of Freddie and Mary Lou. They had both been shot and they were tied to the back of the boat they rode in on. Freddie was shot with a .22 caliber. Mary Lou was shot with a shotgun. It's not really known why Glenn decided to initially lie about what he experienced that night. And according to witnesses, Glenn was seen with both a .22 caliber and a shotgun a few days before the murders. Police learned that Glenn and Mary Lou had a recent sexual affair. They also learned that Freddie recently purchased a car from Glenn, but he never actually paid him all the money. According to a witness, Glenn then said, "I'll take care of him for that." One person said he threatened Freddie directly by saying, "I will feed you to the crabs." Another friend said that Glenn asked that friend to give him an alibi for the night of the murders. So then he was arrested and charged with the murders. He had told several lies. There was a ton of witness accounts. He also denied doing it. But before they went to trial, he would end up pleading guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder because he was facing the death penalty otherwise. Even though he pled guilty, he still denied he had anything to do with it. Now, Glenn had hired a private investigator to look into other possible suspects. The private investigator found a woman named Donna, whose face is blurred out, and that's not actually her real name, but she claimed that she was on the island that night with someone named Ted, and that Freddie was a police informant. She said that Ted was upset with Freddie for being a police informant, so Ted went to the island to take care of Freddie. She was dragged along with him, and she said he gave her one of the guns and forced her to shoot Mary Lou because Mary Lou was now a witness after they had shot and killed Freddie. Here's the problem. It was confirmed that Donna was suffering from extreme schizophrenia. She had been caught in several lies over the years and fabricating stories about a lot of things. And in this particular case, she told 6 separate stories about what happened that night. The only thing consistent with all 6 of her stories is the fact that someone named Ted was there. Now, just because she does have schizophrenia does not necessarily mean that she was lying about what happened. But they've never been able to prove her accounts. And then later on, she recanted all of her statements, saying she made all of them up. Now, they do believe that someone else had to be involved with this, because the 2 bodies, I mean, they're heavy, they're dead weight. And one person would have had to tie these people to the back of a boat. It would have been very difficult for Glenn just to do it all by himself. But they've never found physical evidence pointing to anyone else. They had some physical evidence connecting Glenn, but ultimately the fact that he was seen and confirmed seen with both styles of guns that were used in the murders, the fact that he said he was going to throw Freddie to the crabs, that he was going to take care of him, the fact that this boat conveniently broke down, which made them have to go to this little embankment, which was covered in darkness and very secluded. It all sounds very much like he truly is guilty. Because of his plea agreement that he made, he was eligible to, go for parole, and he was in fact paroled in 1992. But in 1996, he died suddenly from a heart attack at the age of 56. Many people believe he's innocent, more people believe he isn't. And the lack of actual physical evidence and witnesses to the actual murders, I guess we will truly never know. Hello, true crimerers. This is the missing persons case of Jacob Loomis. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this story, Jacob Ryan Loomis is 24 years old, and he is living in Kalispell, Montana. I looked up the pronunciation. I hope I said it correctly. Jacob is 5'8", approximately 120 pounds. He has brown hair and brown eyes. And he has this tattoo. It's kind of a hard image to see, but it's located on his upper right arm in the shoulder area. He had actually just moved to Kalispell, Montana from Oregon just a few months prior to this case. He was actually staying at a place known as the Samaritan House. Basically, it's like a homeless place, and was a part of a transitional living program. He also was employed at 2 different places. Jacob never missed work. If he ever was going to miss work, he would always call. But on October 19th, 2019, Jacob was last seen over on 9th Avenue. He had, I guess, told his mom that he was going to be going on some hunting or camping trip with a couple of friends. I guess one of them, I believe, was his girlfriend, and then one was just another male acquaintance of his. He said that they were planning to go to the Eureka or Libby area. However, since he was last seen on 9th Avenue, and since that last time he spoke to his mom, no one has heard from him ever again. No one has seen him ever again. Jacob's belongings were still at the Samaritan House. He didn't take anything with him. Jacob never called any of his jobs to say he wasn't going to be showing up. He just didn't show up. Now, I don't want to mention the 2 individuals' names because I don't really know if I can legally, since they aren't considered suspects officially. But those 2 individuals have allegedly been extremely uncooperative with police. They have told police, yeah, we'll come in for an interview, but then they don't show up for the interview. At one point, they had to put out an APB for these 2 people to find them. But every time they make an appointment to go in, they just don't show up. And that, to me, is incredibly suspicious. That is a massive red flag. Jacob said, I'm going hunting with these 2 people. He then goes missing and is never seen from again. And these 2 people that he said he was with won't talk to police? Yeah, no, they know something, for sure. But unfortunately, that is all I have on this case. If you have any information about the whereabouts of Jacob Loomis, please call 406-758-7793. Most of the DNA found at the crime scene belonged to the victim, but a tiny fraction belonged to his killer. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of John Jelinek. Viewer discretion is advised. John Joseph Jelinek was born on February 20th, 1967, in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. At the time of this case, he's living in Blairsville, Pennsylvania. John had married a woman named Michelle. They had 3 kids together, but by 2002, the two of them had separated. However, they had not officially divorced yet. But apparently the separation was very full of animosity, anger. It was just ugly. But John was just looking to move on. John was a beloved dentist. He was doing really well for himself, and he always supported his kids. But on April 13th, 2006, the absolute worst would happen. A 13-year-old neighbor of John Jelinek would go to John's house, but before he got to the door, he noticed there was like a big thing of blood on the porch. So he would go to his mom and they would call police. When they arrived, it was one of the bloodiest crime scenes they had ever seen. Blood just dripping down the walls. It looked like chaos in the house, blood all over the floors, and John was stabbed to death. There was blood spatter all over the walls. The blood was so thick that it was seeping through the hardwood and dripping into the basement. It was just an incredibly violent scene. There was also bloody shoe prints going throughout the house that would lead out the back entrance. During the autopsy, they would collect some samples from underneath John's fingernails and they found DNA. They determined that DNA was not John's, nor was it his wife's. There was an astronomical amount of DNA at this crime scene, and pretty much most of it belonged to John, except for what was underneath those nails. Did the DNA match anyone? It sure did. A man named Kevin Foley, the man who was dating Michelle Jelinek. He was a homicide investigator for the Pennsylvania State Police. He and John did not get along. At one point, he actually joked to a colleague, "Hey, you want to help me get rid of a dentist?" Well, the colleague thought he was joking, at least. Michelle had claimed that John had beat one of their kids. Police investigated this and determined she was lying. But that kind of lie created a lot of hostility between Kevin and John. They would determine that Kevin Foley owned a pair of sneakers that were pretty much the exact shoe impression left behind at the scene, but they never actually found those sneakers. Now, initially, the DNA under the fingernails, the odds of it being his exactly was like 1 out of 13,000. But thanks to a new DNA test and advancements in technology, they were able to plug the DNA back into a smarter system, and then said it's now actually 1 out of millions upon millions, meaning it was Kevin Foley's DNA. He claimed to have an alibi. He said he was playing hockey that night. However, John's time of death was put somewhere between 1 and about 2 o'clock in the morning, when Kevin Foley did not actually have an alibi anymore. So with the shoe impression and the now, 1 in millions upon millions of, matched DNA match thing, with his previous comments about, hey, you want to help me, get rid of a dentist, his animosity and hatred of John, the, shoe impressions matching a pair of shoes he was known to have, to prosecutors, it was pretty obvious. Kevin Foley had killed John Jelinek. So, around March of 2009, Kevin Foley would go on trial for the murder of John Jelinek, and he was found guilty on all charges. He would be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Was Michelle involved in any way? There's no proof that she was. The belief is that Kevin Foley had gone to John's house that night to confront him just about all of the stuff going on with the divorce proceedings. One thing led to another. Kevin started beating on John and then eventually went to stabbing him. Now, Michelle did get about a $1 million life insurance policy, basically. Basically, she would have lost about $2,500 in payments a month had the divorce gone forward, and she never would have received that $1 million life insurance policy had the divorce actually gone forward. But because the murder occurred before the divorce proceedings were finalized and official, she got a lot of money. Suspicious, yes, but they found absolutely no proof or evidence that she had any actual involvement in this murder. It did genuinely seem to be a spur-of-the-moment murder. So hopefully she wasn't actually involved. She would die in human waste in one of the worst unusual deaths. Viewer discretion is advised. Monica Meyer was the mayor of Betterton, Maryland. She was a very hands-on mayor. She would always go out into the community and help wherever she could help. And sadly, that would end up costing her life. Mayor Meyer would help out a lot at Betterton's sewage treatment plant facility. It's not this one pictured here, though. She would help clean out the waste tanks. She also helped check chlorine levels and whatnot. And she did this by herself a lot. She would go into the sewage plant herself, just on her own, and do this with almost no one else there. And that's exactly what she did on March 20th, 1980. She was walking along the catwalks that were above the sewage tanks that held human waste. And it's believed she was attempting to check chlorine levels when she accidentally fell over the railing and fell into one of the human waste tanks. They said it was like putty, the substance. It was actually worse than quicksand. She became submerged in fecal matter, and no matter how much she may have tried to struggle, it was nearly impossible for her to get to the surface and get air. One of the plant supervisors was in the facility as well, but he was way far away, and so as he was walking the catwalks, he noticed kind of just a portion of her floating in the sewage tank. By the time he was able to get to her, by the time the ambulance was able to get to her, it was already too late. Mayor Monica Meyer drowned in human feces, and it took her life. And I cannot imagine a worse way to go. A young girl is murdered and her sister is blamed. It would take 35 years to clear her name. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Risa Trexler. Viewer discretion is advised. Risa Trexler was born on October 11th, 1968, and that was in Rowan County, North Carolina. Risa had a sister who was 2 years younger than her. Her name was Jody. The two of them were always very, very close when they were younger, but as they grew into teenagers, they started to kind of drift apart a little bit. Risa had her own group of friends. Jody was, nervous about just starting high school, but they were still very good sisters and they were still very good friends. They lived here in this house in Salisbury, North Carolina, and actually right next door to them was this house, which belonged to their grandparents. The girls would always kind of go back and forth between houses. It was June 15th, 1984. Risa was 15 years old. That day, she had been hanging out with some friends at her house. They hung out for a couple of hours. Jody was there. But then Risa said, it's time to watch my favorite soap opera, which she would typically do over at her grandparents' house. So she left this house to go to that one. The friends left the house, and then Jody was left in their home by herself. She didn't think anything of Risa, being gone. She knew she was basically over there. But when Risa's grandfather got home, and this is her mom, the neighborhood could hear a blood-curdling scream coming from him. He had just discovered a horrifically bloody crime scene in his own home. Risa had been stabbed multiple times, and one of them was so deep that it severed her spinal cord. They also believed that she was sexually assaulted. They did find DNA at the crime scene. A cloud of suspicion would hang over the two male friends that were hanging out with Risa and Jody earlier that day. And honestly, the two of them, they were never able to escape the, accusations. One of the friends would eventually fall to drugs and alcohol and died because of it. He was innocent, by the way. But it would be Risa's sister, Jody, who became the prime suspect in everybody's eyes. She didn't have a confirmed alibi because she was home alone in the house next door. But the court of public opinion basically found Jody just guilty. Now, it should also be said that multiple witnesses said that they saw a black man running from that neighborhood, from the direction of the home that Risa was murdered in. They also found male bodily fluid on her body. But still, Jody was she had to have been involved. Why? Because they maybe drifted apart a little bit? Her own mother basically started to believe it. The town turned against her. The police turned against her. And the police, they don't have any physical evidence to connect her to it, but they suspect her too. The investigation was pretty much a hot mess, it seemed like. They interviewed, just a mountain of people, and they never found a true suspect. They never had any physical evidence connecting Jody to the crime scene or the two male friends that were hanging out with them earlier that day. Nothing. And then the case just went cold. And it stayed cold for many, many years. Jody basically went about her life. She grew up, but she still had this cloud of suspicion hanging over her. From the people from her own town, the police, her own family. So Jody basically took this into her own hands because she was sick and tired of this, and she was tired of the police not finding a suspect. So to clear her name, she went on to Dr. Phil and took a lie detector test. I don't know what that was. So she took a lie detector test on Dr. Phil, and it proved that she was not lying. She was telling the truth when she had nothing to do with the murder of her sister. She was 13 years old at the time, by the way. But we all know lie detector tests aren't solid proof of really anything. But what this did was it reopened the investigation. And it really put all of the eyes back on the police there in Salisbury, North Carolina. Like, hey, why aren't you doing anything? So they go back to the evidence box and they discovered that there is something that had male bodily fluid on it that they hadn't tested in a very, very long time. So when they run this through like a basic DNA test, it proved that the DNA came from likely an African-American male, but it didn't link to any suspects at that point. If you do remember, witnesses said they thought they saw a black man running from that area around the time of her murder. So then they take the DNA and they use forensic genealogy, our good old friend, in the hopes that they can link that DNA to the suspect's family members, which they do. That DNA completely clears Jody from any wrongdoing, even though it should have already back at the beginning. The forensic genealogy led them to this man, Curtis Edward Blair. He had no connection to the family. They didn't know who he was. But when this came to light, they did some digging and they found out he was working in that same area at the time of the murder, literally just down the street. When police tried to find him to arrest him, they found out that he died. He had been dead since 2004. This DNA evidence came out in 2019. So they were able to exhume his body, and to be able to confirm it was him, they got a DNA sample, and it was a match. He was the man to sexually assault and murder Risa Drexler. Risa and even Jody may not get the proper justice, but at least thanks to technology and science, everyone can finally be at peace. 60 years ago, a 13-year-old girl was supposed to board a bus to go home. She never even made it to the bus. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Noreen Ann Greenlee. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this story, Noreen is a 13-year-old girl who lives in Bowmanville, which is in Ontario, Canada. On September 14th, 1963, Noreen and two of her friends would go to a local bowling alley. After that, they would go to a place called Sam's Restaurant to get a bite to eat. Then they went to the home of one of the three of them. Her name was Bonnie, and they hung out for a little bit. At approximately 11 p.m., Noreen decided she was ready to go back home, and there was going to be a bus that would pick her up just down the street from her friend's house. The bus was supposed to get there at 11:30 p.m. Her friends saw her leave the house at approximately 11, and that was the last time anyone would ever see her again. Noreen never made it home, and according to the bus driver, Noreen never even made it to the bus. So Noreen was reported missing, and within hours they had hundreds of searchers combing the entire area searching for this little girl. But these searches turned up absolutely nothing. They found no clothing items, they found no trace of Noreen whatsoever. They would search through all of the wooded areas where a person may possibly dispose of a body, but they never even came across any remains or anything. Everyone was at a loss. Now, as they're searching, they're also questioning everyone in that neighborhood. Multiple witnesses said they saw a car that looked just like this, a possibly 1957 to 1959 Ford Prefect 100E. One of the witnesses who actually saw this was Noreen's sister, Joyce. She said the same story that the other witnesses said, that they saw this blue car speeding down the road, but she heard what she thought was the sound of screaming coming from the blue car. She said that scream sounded identical to her sister, Noreen. As a matter of fact, this car was going so fast and driving so recklessly, this car almost hit Joyce and her friend, who I guess were out and about in the neighborhood. I don't know why everyone was out so late, but it was a different time. This, I guess, is the stretch of road where the witnesses saw the blue vehicle. But unfortunately, nothing more came from this. Noreen's case went cold. In 2005, a cold case team did a composite drawing of what she may have looked like a little bit older, in case for some reason she was still alive, hopefully. And then in 2016, police got a tip. A man said that his father made a deathbed confession. He apparently said he saw her walking on the side of the road and offered her a ride, and she got in the car. He says he then struck her over the head for whatever reason, and then he dumped her body. Police combed that entire area, but they never found a single thing, and they felt it was just another dead end. They don't even know if his story was true. And here we are 60 years later, and she's still missing. This is the final image of a man shortly before he would die in one of the worst deaths imaginable. Viewer discretion is advised. Pictured here is Deon Dreyer. He was from South Africa, and he was a diver. On December 17th, 1994, the 20-year-old was diving. This was at Boesmansgat Cave, which is located in South Africa. And I guess this is a particular area known as Bushman's Hole. He was doing a practice dive there, but he never made it up. And his body never floated to the surface. They believe he may have died from oxygen toxicity. They had sent people down there to see if they could recover his body, but it never became a possibility. Until 10 years later. This was diver David Shaw. He was originally from Australia, and he was a technical diver who had done well over 300 dives. Well, one day he decided he was going to attempt to go to the bottom of Boesmansgat and try to retrieve the body of Deon Dreyer. He went down there, he found the body, which was unbelievable to begin with. He then had to go back up to the top, which is where he would tell Deon's family, I found him, I'm going back down, and I'm going to get him. It was January 8th, 2005. This photo was taken moments before that particular dive. He had also gone down there with a partner. This is kind of a visual representation of what this dive would have looked like. Very deep, very dark. The two divers did manage to get themselves to the bottom, where they did find the body of Deon Dreyer again. Now, as Dave is trying to basically get hold of the body, what they didn't really account for was that the body had become very buoyant. This was because, I guess, of like the skeletal remains, but also partially covered with the diver's scuba suit. It like developed this soap-like kind of material that caused the body to float. So Dave is beginning to kind of struggle with all of this. He puts his underwater light down on the surface of the cave, which there's a bunch of wires connected to that light. As he's struggling with the body, the wires get caught around him. Dave becomes entangled in these wires. They're becoming entangled with the cords of the body bag they were using as well. Dave is struggling to free himself. His partner was also getting entangled. That individual does manage to begin to resurface because he needs to. But Dave, unfortunately, is kind of left tangled in these wires down below. As Dave struggled and struggled and struggled, the high pressure of being down that deep would create severe respiratory issues. There would be a large buildup of carbon dioxide, which then caused him to black out, where he then died. 3 days later, Dave Shaw's body and the body of Deon Dreyer would both float to the surface of Bushman's Hole. 17 years after a brutal murder, DNA would finally bring the killer to justice. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Stacey Fairchild. Viewer discretion is advised. Stacey Fairchild was born on March 3rd, 1971, and that was in Lancaster, Ohio. By 1989, she is 17 years old and working at the River City Mall. And on February 2nd, 1989, that's exactly what she was doing. She worked, and then she got off and was ready to go home. The problem is Stacey never got home. After waiting about an hour or so, they realized something has to be up. So they would call police. And of course they said, oh, she's a teenager, she probably just ran away. Can we just take every case like this just seriously from the get-go, just for funsies? Just in case. At any rate, they would start searching for her within, 24 hours or so. The next day, Stacy's vehicle was found, and it was completely burnt out. Someone had set the entire car on fire, and there was almost nothing left inside. Stacy was not in the car, so she is still missing. But now they believe, okay, something definitely bad happened here. And then 2 days later, after the car was found, in the Hocking River, the body of a young female was found. And unfortunately, they were able to confirm the identity as 17-year-old Stacy Fairchild. The coroner would rule her death a drowning. They were able to collect some male bodily fluid from her body, which did suggest that she was sexually assaulted. However, this is 1989 and the technology wasn't really perfect yet, so they weren't able to use it to find anyone. Of course, they're questioning everyone in her life, her coworkers, her family, any potential boyfriends, and they're not coming up with anything. No leads, no tips. Maybe this was a completely random thing. And unfortunately, that appeared to be the case, and the case just went cold. That is until 17 years later, in 2006. This man, Lendy Dysart, who by 2006 is a father of 6 children, well, he had to surrender his DNA because of a previous prison sentence. And one day, the federal authorities were running DNA through for unsolved cases. His DNA came up as a match, a definitive match. It was his DNA that was left on Stacy Fairchild. It did not appear that he knew her or that she knew him. He likely just surprised her and accosted her as she was probably walking towards her car. Dysart would be sentenced to 10 years for a previous robbery, which was why they had the DNA in the first place. And then he got 25 more years for the murder of Stacy Fairchild. So he's spending just 35 years in prison, which is not even close to being enough. The week-long cruise was over, and all the passengers would disembark from the cruise ship. Except for one. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of John Halford. Viewer discretion is advised. 63-year-old John Halford was from Milton Keynes in England. John had a lifelong aspiration to see the Egyptian pyramids. So in April of 2011, he booked a cruise ship, specifically the Thompson Spirit, and it was going to be a week-long cruise in which he would be able to finally see the pyramids. John went, he saw, he had an absolute blast. Now, unfortunately, he had to go on this trip alone because of financial reasons. His kids were finishing school, but he just really, really wanted to do this. The week-long cruise ended on April 6, 2011. It would dock in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. When the ship docked, John sent a message to his wife. John, in very good spirits, said, "I'm excited to see you, and I will see you at the airport." But John never got on the flight. When he didn't arrive at the airport, his wife spoke to the airline and they said he never even handed in his ticket to board the plane. So then she would contact the cruise. Well, after inspection, they found John's items still in his cabin. He had packed his suitcase with some souvenirs that he purchased. His passport, his glasses, and his cell phone were found just laying out in his cabin, which would indicate that he never even got off the ship. According to witnesses, John was seen at one of the bars on the ship just as it was docking. Witnesses said that John would only ever have a drink, maybe 2. He would never ever get drunk on the cruise because he always wanted his wits about him. They all said he seemed to be in a really good mood. He was always happy and joking and laughing with people. He was sharing his wonderful experience with the pyramids, but he just vanished. Apparently there were no cameras on board, or there weren't cameras pointing in the right areas to see if they could track him. They searched the cruise liner from top to bottom. They found no trace of him. They also combed the surrounding waters near where the ship docked, since they can say for sure that he was still there right around the time the ship was docking. They did say that the waters surrounding this area were very highly shark infested, and that if he fell in, it may not be good news. But they found no traces of him in the water. No blood, no remains, clothing, nothing. The railings are nearly 4 feet high. It's extremely uncommon to just accidentally fall over. Some speculate he was maybe pushed, but there's no proof. And he wasn't suicidal. So where is John?
Earl said the gunshot wound was in the left side of her head, but Ruby was right-handed. It would have been impossible for a right-handed individual to shoot herself in the left temple using her right hand, especially with the long-barreled .22 caliber pistol the Morrises owned.
Okay, so I've been re-binge watching some Forensic Files episodes just because, for whatever. I have always wondered this, and maybe anyone who follows me that is a forensic pathologist, a coroner, mortician, whatever you want to, whatever you are. I have always wondered why in shows like this, they always, now I know what they're saying. They're saying it's basically impossible for someone who's right-handed to reach around and shoot themselves on the left side of their head, especially with a long barrel gun. I get that. Totally understand. But why is it that people always, why do they discount the fact that the person, even if they're right-handed, could have used their left hand? Have we put people in prison incorrectly because of things like this? Because I'm right-handed, I can't really write with my left hand, but I can do this, and I can do, I can do stuff with my left hand like normal. So why do they always think it seems to be impossible for a right-handed person to instead use their left hand to pull a trigger if they're ending their own life on the left side of their head? It sounds like they're using the fact that they're right-handed and they wouldn't use their right hand to shoot themselves on the left side of their head to basically justify why it could not have possibly been a self-harm situation. Am I crazy thinking along this line, or am I have just always wondered that. It's the same thing when they say, oh, the gun was found near the person's left hand, but they're right-handed, so they wouldn't have used their left hand. The gunpowder shot residue was on their left hand, but they're right-handed, so it had to be staged. It just has always boggled me. So maybe if someone could help clarify why it seems to always be discounted that a person just might use their other hand. You know what I mean? Do we have innocent people in prison because of this type of thing? I hope not. But anyway, just, if you know, just answer. Hello, true crimerers. This is another murdered or missing Indigenous woman case. Or actually, multiple cases. Viewer discretion is advised. The first case is 16-year-old Selena Not Afraid. Selena was a member of the Crow tribe in Montana. Selena dealt with some hardships throughout her life. She dealt with her twin sister Zoe ending her own life. Her brother was shot and killed. It was just full of tragedy. On New Year's Eve 2019, Selena was invited to a party, and this was in Billings, Montana. She was one of many teenagers there who were seen drinking, under the age of 21. The following day, she and a group of people from the party got into a vehicle, and the plan was for them to head to Hardin. But the car had issues along the way, so they stopped at a rest stop. So when they stopped to fix the vehicle, by the time it was fixed and ready to go, they said Selena just vanished. She was just gone. And these people just left her there. So once she never came home, her family reported her missing. On January 20th, 2020, so this is several weeks later, her body is found less than a mile from that rest stop. This is after many, many, many searches had been done of that area, where her body was not there before. This is confirmed by several people, but not police. The coroner would rule her death an accident, that it was accidental hypothermia. And that's basically it. They just closed the case from there. They said no foul play was suspected. Her family believes something way more nefarious happened, and it's really not that far-fetched to agree with that. But as of now, no one is investigating her case as a homicide. Why did she suddenly vanish? Why did her friends not even look for her? Why'd they leave without her? Pretty damn suspicious. The next case is Roberta Jean Rains. She would go by Bertie. There really isn't much about her story. The last time anyone saw her was July 10th, 2001. and this is in the Toppenish, Washington area. She was last seen with a man named Jose Merced Zamora, who just a year after she vanished, he would shoot and kill a 17-year-old boy. He was apprehended in 2007 finally. He said Birdie was with him after he murdered that child, and they went to Mexico. But then he said she just fled on her own. Police have never been able to verify those statements. But Birdie has never been seen since. The third story is a woman named Joanne Betty Wyman John. She was a mother to 11 children who suddenly vanished on August 1st, 1988. She was last seen in a tavern in Brownstone, which was in Washington state. In February 1991, her skeletal remains were found, and they said it was a homicide, but there's been no update since. Somebody killed her, but the question is who? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Susan Waters. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this story, Susan was a 41-year-old mother, and she lived in Auburn, California. Unfortunately, I really don't have much information on her, but it was September 5th, 2003. That day, Susan had attended the Gold County Fair there in Auburn, and as far as anyone knows, she attended that event alone. Later that evening, she was then seen at the now closed Shanghai restaurant and bar in Old Town. But then after that, no one can say where she had gone or if she was with anyone at all. At 1:15 a.m. on September 6, 2003, the night after Susan was last seen, her body was found next to some bushes by the SBC building. At first, her death was not ruled homicide or anything. But then, I guess a couple of days later, police released that her death was a homicide, but they did not specify how she was killed. And as far as I can tell, they've never released that information. Now, witnesses would come forward to say that they saw a man, a mysterious man, in the exact same area that Susan's body was found, I guess a few hours before her body was actually found. He was described as a white male, 6 foot tall, between 190 to 200 pounds, and he is considered a person of interest in the death, not a suspect. The witnesses also said that this man is associated with a tan 4-door sedan that was probably from the early 80s. No one ever saw this man with Susan, and that pretty much is it. The case pretty much went cold from the get-go. They've even said that they've had almost no tips, they've had almost no leads, they have nothing. All they can say is they know for a fact she was murdered and then dumped by a building. They don't even know if that was the actual murder site. So police are actively looking for anyone who may have the answers they're searching for. Because someone somewhere out there has got to know the truth. And perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information about the murder of 41-year-old Susan Waters from Auburn, California, last seen leaving the Shanghai restaurant and bar on September 5th, 2003, please call 1-800-923-8191. This death is reportedly the only time in recorded history that a person died in this manner. Hello, true crimerers. This is Worst Unusual Deaths. Viewer discretion is advised. Fun fact, you have a 1 in 1.6 million chance of being struck by a meteorite. This is that one time. This happened near the Bharathidasan University in India. It was 2016, and a bus driver, whose name was V. Kamaraj, he was walking near the university when all of a sudden, a large crack, a big boom, came from seemingly nowhere. Later on, people would say they heard this sound from like literally miles away. The sound was a meteorite, basically cracking through the atmosphere. It broke off into small pieces, and those pieces became projectiles. When it landed, it created a 4-foot deep crater. Several people were struck by the projectiles, one of them being V. Kamaraj. I mean, this is basically like being hit by a bullet. So while the others were only kind of lightly hit, he got basically full force of this. And he experienced severe, severe injuries. Injuries that unfortunately he would not survive. This is reportedly the only time in recorded human history that a person was killed by a meteorite. And it was as random as you could possibly get. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Alina Kennedy. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this story, Alina Kennedy, pictured here, was a 36-year-old woman from Lexington, South Carolina. On May 25th, 2017, she was reported missing by her mother. There was a big family gathering that day, and Alina was absolutely expected to be there, and she said she would be there. But when she never showed up, and they didn't hear from her even hours after the event, her mom tried giving her a call, but she never picked up. Alina just seemed to completely fall off the face of the earth, which was way unexpected of her. She was not someone who would ever just pick up and leave, and her family just truly felt something was wrong, so they reported her missing. The case was investigated for several weeks. They were getting tips and some leads here and there, but it wouldn't be until June 15th, 2017 when they got a really, really big tip. The tip led police to a man named Tony Corley. Tony had apparently said at a party that he had strangled Alina, or to other people he insinuated that he had something to do with her disappearance. So what police found out was that Alina was actually staying at Tony's house for all of April and apparently some of May. But when he was initially asked by police when she went missing, he said that she just picked up and moved out of state. He said Alina moved to Florida, which just was not making any sense to any of her family. The day after police questioned Tony, on June 16th, 2017, Alina's body was found. Based on the tips, because Tony had a big mouth, she was found on Old Two-Notch Road in Lexington County. Her body had been burned and encased in cement, and then thrown into a large trash can. On June 23rd, 2017, he was formally arrested and charged with her murder. Shortly after that, a girlfriend of Tony's, Harriet Haley Coleman, was also arrested and charged with basically charges to do with helping dispose of a body, because it was revealed that she helped remove and dispose of Alina's body. Whatever his motive was, I'm not 100% sure. I don't know if they've ever actually revealed his motive. But all of the physical evidence they collected, the witness testimonies, and the circumstantial evidence all pointed to him. And it was basically a slam dunk case. So Tony was convicted of the murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I was able to find the court records related to Harriet, and she was sentenced to 9 years for destruction and desecration of human remains. May they both rot. The death of a prominent rancher in 1970 is considered Oklahoma's most famous unsolved murder. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of E.C. Mullendore III. Viewer discretion is advised. Eugene Claremont Mullendore III, he would go by E.C. He was born on October 26, 1937. He was born into a wealthy ranch family. The family owned Crossbell Ranch, which was in Osage County, Oklahoma. He would later go on to marry Linda Vance, and the two of them had 4 children together. In 1960, E.C.'s father, Gene, would basically hand over the ranch to him, E.C. III. E.C. tended to have a pretty extravagant lifestyle. He liked to spend a lot of money, and because of this, he racked up a ton of debt, which included $12 million in debt on the ranch. At one point, Linda decided she was going to take the kids and move to Tulsa. E.C. had some drinking issues, and she was hoping that that would entice him to stop drinking. She left with the kids around September 20th of 1970, which takes us to the night of September 26, 1970. Chub Anderson here was E.C.'s bodyguard. Late that evening, he was drawing a bath for E.C. when he said he suddenly heard gunshots. He then says he runs downstairs, he sees his boss, E.C., slumped over on the couch with blood coming out of him. And as he approached EC, he heard another gunshot, and suddenly he had been shot in the shoulder. Then he saw two men, which he did not get a very good look at and did not recognize, ran out the door. He says he fired his gun towards them, where you can see bullet holes in the glass, but does not appear to have hit them at all. When police arrived, they mishandled everything. They trampled across the crime scene, basically contaminating it. EC's body was removed before they could examine it there, and then he was embalmed before they did an autopsy, which basically all of this ruined any chance of a proper investigation. EC had a $15 million life insurance policy out on him, where I guess the Mullendorf family agreed to settle and give $8 million to Linda. And then the ranch filed bankruptcy and they had to sell a whole bunch of livestock. It wouldn't be until 2010 when a private investigator interviewed Chubb Anderson. Chubb, EC's bodyguard, said he actually was the one to shoot EC because he was actually helping the deputies serve divorce papers to EC. An argument broke out and then EC was shot. He then says he had a ranch hand help him stage the scene by firing through the windows. Shortly after this confession, he died. I don't know if Linda was ever looked at or if she's still alive. This murder has gone unsolved for nearly 42 years. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Barbara Ann Bushnell. Viewer discretion is advised. Barbara Ann Bushnell was born on August 5th, 1962. She lived in the Bethesda, Maryland area. This particular story takes place in Ocean City, Maryland, and that is around the area where Barbara worked. Barbara was described as sort of like your all-American girl. She was tall, she was beautiful, she was intelligent, and she was always described as being a very, careful person. But on the evening of September 19th, 1981, someone would take her forever. Barbara worked at an ice cream shop there in Ocean City, Maryland. She apparently worked that evening and then was seen leaving work. Later that same evening, someone would walk past Barbara's vehicle, and when they kind of peered inside, they noticed something absolutely horrible. There was a woman on the back seat covered in blood. Police arrived, and they would quickly piece together that the vehicle belonged to Barbara Ann Bushnell, and they were able, through identification, to say that the victim was 19-year-old Barbara Bushnell. The coroner determined that she was sexually assaulted, and then the person just slit her throat and walked away. According to witness statements, enough people would say that they saw two men in the same area right around the time the murder would have likely taken place. One of the men was described as having dark complexion. The people thought that they were likely a Hispanic man, somewhere between 25 and 35 years old, 5 foot 8 inches tall, and this person had acne or pockmarks all over their face. They said the man was bald on top, but had braided hair kind of on the around and on the back, and that this man spoke with a Caribbean accent. Police thought that was interesting because the Monday night before this one, another woman was attacked by a man with that exact same description. But in this instance, the 29-year-old woman survived the attack. She gave a description, which is kind of how they pieced this together. The victim said he was with another man, and they were screaming derogatory terms at her before they attacked her. However, the identities of the main man and his accomplice, they've never been found. Police did collect physical evidence from Barbara's vehicle, but that evidence has never yielded any suspects. Unfortunately, I don't see any other articles about this story after 1982, 1983. There's virtually nothing more on this case. So whoever killed Barbara Ann Bushnell, unfortunately to this day, got away with it.
This is what happens when you eat dry ice.
That's a poor decision. A tragedy that sounds like it came straight from a Final Destination movie. Hello, true crimerers. This is another Worst Freak Accidents. Viewer discretion is advised. Today's story takes us to Lanarkshire in Scotland. Yes, I know, I'm sure I said it wrong. I apologize. 31-year-old Jane MacDonald was staying with a friend, a reverend, in that area. It was the summer of 2003. Jane was about to go to bed. It was approximately 9:30 p.m. And being a house guest, she wanted to do some cleaning up before she went to bed. So she was putting dishes away. I don't know if Jane had done this or the person that lived there had done this, but the knives in the dishwasher, like the big knives, were all loaded in with the point up. So Jane, who was loading the dishwasher, accidentally slipped on some water nearby, and she fell backwards. And believe it or not, she landed on the back of her head and impaled herself on one of the knives. Her friend heard the commotion, ran downstairs, saw what happened, called 999. The ambulance arrived. They managed to safely, remove her from the knife. They rush her to the hospital, but unfortunately she is pronounced deceased. She died in the embrace of her brother. Jane was described as a vivacious and very bubbly young woman. She was a no-nonsense person. She loved being out at nightclubs and bars and just having a good time. And at the time of this case, the reason why she was staying with her friend, she was doing legal studies at nearby Motherwell College. But sadly, Jane did not get to complete that. It's so often the things we never think about. And always exercise caution even in the simplest tasks. And always load your knives pointing down. A woman was kidnapped from her home and murdered, and it would be an episode of Unsolved Mysteries that cracked the case. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Ethel Kidd. Viewer discretion is advised. Ethel Kidd was born on May 27th, 1927, and she was born and raised in Easton, Maryland. She would go on to marry a man named Gilbert, and then eventually they would have some kids together, and then some grandkids. By 1989, her and Gilbert decided it was time to retire, and they were going to build themselves a new house. So this was going to be in the Burr Hill, Virginia area. They chose that area because it was really, really close to their kids and their grandkids. And that was really important to Ethel because family for her was everything. It was April 12, 1989. That morning and afternoon, Ethel had gone to where the house was being constructed and spent some time there. Then at approximately 2 p.m., she spotted at her current home, and actually this was by one of her own kids that saw her getting mail from her mailbox. And that was the last time anyone would see Ethel again. The next morning, one of Ethel's son-in-laws would go to the house because no one can get a hold of Ethel. The one thing I don't know is I don't know where her husband Gilbert was during all of this. It's not really made clear. At any rate, when the son-in-law got to the house, they noticed there was an atlas, an opened up atlas sitting on the lawn. Then, when the son-in-law entered the house, there was no sign of Ethel anywhere, but her car was still in the driveway. At this point, they got very concerned, and so they called police. So inside the atlas were some pieces of paper, and one of them had all this writing on it. They assumed the kidnapper had dropped the atlas and all these notes. They searched the area completely. I mean, they searched just miles of area, and they weren't able to find anything. But then approximately a week and a half to 2 weeks later, some hunters were in the nearby woods, and they found a woman tied to a tree, and she was deceased. When police arrived, they were able to ID her as Ethel Kidd. She had been sexually assaulted, and then she was strangled to death, and then just tied to the tree. Because her body was not decomposed, they believe that her body was actually stored somewhere else, and then put here shortly before she was found. They're thinking maybe some kind of freezer she was put in. There was male bodily fluid on her. They also got some fingerprints from some of the notes that were left in that atlas, but they didn't match anyone. And so the case went quickly cold. Ethel's case was aired on Unsolved Mysteries, and it was re-aired and re-aired. It took a couple airings of this case for someone to finally recognize something. Somebody recognized the handwriting. The person said that handwriting belonged, to this guy, Edward Wayne Beverly. Now, when police were able to track him down, he was actually in prison at that time for burglary. So, they took his fingerprints and they took his blood. The fingerprint was a match to the fingerprints found on the papers inside the atlas that was on Ethel Kidd's lawn. And these notes, by the way, were like a murder checklist. There were some things in there that was basically a roadmap to kidnap and murder basically a random person. Like, this was planned out, but he didn't know Ethel. It was just like a random choice. But like I said, the fingerprint was a match. His blood matched the DNA that was found on Ethel. All because somebody recognized his handwriting. That's pretty wild to me. That person has a really good eye. Edward Wayne Beverly was charged with sexual assault, abduction, and murder. And he was convicted on all charges and got 3 consecutive life sentences. He died in prison in 2008. Again, there wasn't much mention of Gilbert, her husband, and like where he was during all of this. You know, considering he wasn't even a suspect, I just don't know where he was. But sadly, he passed away in 2006. The son-in-law who went to the house originally to report her missing, he also passed away, as did one of her sons. This family went through a lot of tragedy. But at least Ethel got her justice. Only 3 years ago, a woman would vanish, and her family is still wondering, have you seen Fauna Frey? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Fauna Frey. Viewer discretion is advised. Fauna was a 45-year-old woman who was living in Dexter, Oregon. She lived with her father and her brother, and I guess the 3 of them were in business together. They sold houses. However, on June 19th, 2020, tragedy would strike. Fauna's brother would die unexpectedly of a heart attack. Her mother died in 2004, her sister died in 2006, so she had gone through a lot of grieving. When her brother died, it devastated her. On June 27th, 2020, she decides to drive from Dexter, Oregon to Grants Pass, Oregon. I guess she had belongings from her brother that she wanted to give to some of his friends. So she gets into her vehicle pictured here, and then she takes off. At approximately 7:45 p.m. on June 28th, she checks in at a Super 8 motel, and that's in Grants Pass. At 8 p.m., she calls her father from the motel room. She then goes to a local Fred Meyer's where she makes a $130 purchase. Clothing, toiletries, snacks, that kind of thing. She's seen on camera at the Fred Meyer's leaving and getting into her car, and then Super 8 can confirm she got back to the hotel that night. Now, later on when her dad was questioned, he said that she sounded very, disoriented on the phone call, talking about angels and, these random things. But she didn't seem in any kind of distress, and she wasn't in any kind of horrific mood. Definitely, there was no indications she planned to just pick up and leave or something worse. Her father recommended she go to a nicer place, and so he recommended the L.I.S.K Inn, and that's pictured here. So, Fauna checks out of the Super 8 at 8:35 a.m., At 12:36 p.m., she makes a large purchase at a Big 5 store, about $250 worth. At 2:35 p.m., she officially calls the L.I.S.K Inn and makes a reservation, and it was going to be for that night. She then uses her card to buy more food, snacks, and stuff. The final purchase she made was at 3:39 p.m. on June 29th, and then her card has never been used since. Earlier that day, she did withdraw $200 from a bank. The drive from the Super 8 to the L.I.S.K Inn would have been about 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes tops. Most of the drive is pretty highly populated with a lot of people around, not a lot of rural areas until you get closer to this inn, but she never makes it to the L.I.S.K Inn. She never called the inn to cancel, and suddenly, gone. Just like that, completely vanished. All of the purchases she made, to me, shows that she did not have any intentions of ending her own life. She didn't tell anyone if she planned to go on a hike or go camping or anything. So her and her vehicle just were gone. So she was reported missing by her father. Now, her father would tell police that at some point, I guess late on June 28th, she had told her dad that she had picked up a female hitchhiker. Somehow police tracked down this hitchhiker, questioned her, and she clearly had no knowledge about the whereabouts of Fauna. Police, grilled this hitchhiker, and they were able to rule her out and I guess confirm her alibis, because she was not seen on camera at all with Fauna. Then on September 23rd, 2020, her vehicle was found. It was found in an area called Rubin Mountain Road, a very rural area. So police took the area where they found the vehicle and they scoured the entire area with search teams, dogs, searched by land, by air, and they found nothing. They did not find Fauna anywhere. There was no indication in her vehicle that there was any sign of a struggle. No, like, blood or pulled out hair. There's no foreign fingerprints were found. Her cell phone and laptop weren't even with her. She had left those back at her house. Now, authorities would kind of look at the purchases she made in the moments leading up to her disappearance. She had purchased a 3-pack of flashlights, a lantern, tennis shoes. She'd bought like 10 cans of tuna and some more like activewear. To them, that indicated she may have gone camping without actually telling anyone. And perhaps something happened to her while she was camping. But that's just a theory. There were no other witnesses to say they spotted her. There have been no more belongings of hers found. And this is just another case where someone just seemed to absolutely vanish off the face of the earth. There is currently a $25,000 reward for any information leading to finding Fauna Frey. If you have any information about the missing Fauna Frey, please contact 541-474-5117. You can also contact the John Frey number. That's her father. Someone out there's got to know something. People don't just disappear into nothing. She has got to be somewhere. He was last seen leaving a bar in Indiana, and that was nearly 5 years ago. Hello, true crimerers. This is the missing persons case of Kevin Nguyen. Viewer discretion is advised. Kevin Nguyen was born on October 4th, 1993. On the evening of December 8th, 2018, Kevin had been at the Brass Rail Bar, located on 1121 Broadway in Fort Wayne, Indiana. A couple of hours later, he is seen leaving. Now, this is at around 2 o'clock or so in the morning. Allegedly, he was involved in a potential altercation at the bar. Some would say, and this is not 100% confirmed, that Kevin was seen messing around with some girls who didn't want the attention. And this may have been what led to this supposed altercation. But Kevin never got home. He was never seen from, never heard from again. When he was initially reported missing, it actually took police almost a week to even go to the bar where he was last seen to even investigate. But eventually, when police started to really dig into this, they were pulling up CCTV footage from the surrounding area. That is when they caught an image of Kevin Nguyen at approximately 2:40 a.m. that morning, just outside this Arby's, located on 610 West Jefferson Boulevard. Apparently, it's like literally just down the road from the bar. But they could not find any other images of Kevin beyond this. Now, initially, when this first happened, someone did find a pair of broken glasses in the parking lot of the bar. These would later be identified as belonging to Kevin Nguyen. But there were allegedly no other signs of like a fight, like blood or anything like that. But that's all there is. That's the end. According to police, they have searched around the bar, they've searched near the Arby's, they've searched the entire surrounding area, and they've never found any trace of him. No other articles of clothing or anything. So the family has basically been utilizing social media as best as they can to try to get this story out there. So, if you have any information about the disappearance of Kevin Nguyen, please contact the missing persons detective at 260-427-1201. You can also contact the FBI office there at 800-634-4097. Perhaps someone somewhere out there knows the truth about what happened to Kevin Nguyen that night. Perhaps that someone is you. So please, if you have information, help this family get the answers they deserve. This is the last known image of a young girl shortly before she would be killed. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Alexandra Flores. Viewer discretion is advised. Alexandra Flores was just a 5-year-old girl. She was in preschool. She went to Loya School in San Elizario in Texas. On November 18th, 2001, Alexandra was here at this Walmart with her family in the El Paso, Texas area. They were doing some holiday shopping. It was crowded, there was a rush of people, and at one point Alexandra got separated from her parents. And then they never saw her again. When they looked down, she was gone. Her parents, pictured here, would search the store everywhere for her, but they could not find her. So they reported her missing immediately. Sometime shortly before all of this, one of the security personnel at this Walmart saw a van in the parking lot that was still running, but there was no one in it. That security person waited for a few minutes, and no one came back to it, so they took down the plates. This happened just before Alexandra went missing. So they begin to scour the CCTV footage of the store. They see a man walk into the store, and 129 seconds later, they catch that same man leaving with a young girl, wearing the exact same clothing that Alexandra was seen wearing. Her parents confirmed that this girl here in the red was Alexandra. She had followed this stranger out the store. So the security person from earlier told police about this mysterious van. It would be this van here. When police ran the plates, they found its owner. His name was David Santiago Renteria. He had been convicted previously of indecency with a child and molestation of a child. He was a convicted sex offender, so he became their first suspect. Sadly, the very next morning, they would find Alexandra Flores. She was lying in a parking lot near a doctor's office. She had a bag over her head that appeared to have been attempted to be caught on fire, but the little girl was deceased. The coroner could not determine if she was sexually assaulted or not. Her cause of death was manual strangulation. She was deceased before the fire of the bag. On that melted bag, there was a palm print. Because David Santiago Renteria was an ex-convict, his palm print was on file. The palm print on the bag was a match. So he was arrested and charged with the kidnapping and murder of 5-year-old Alexandra Flores. He would be convicted and sentenced to death. He has since tried to appeal his conviction, but it's always been denied. His execution has been finally set for November of 2023, just a few short months away. And all I can think is thank goodness that security person took down that plate number. He would refer to himself as, quote, your god Satan. Yeah. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Andrew Worst. Viewer discretion is advised. By 1998, Andrew Worst is a 14-year-old middle school student. He attends Parker Middle School, which is located in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania. He apparently would say things like he thought he was a zombie, or at times he would say he was the only real person on Earth. He even referred to himself as your god, Satan. But he was also a super quiet kid, also pretty well behaved. His mom said he never got into trouble. He didn't lack, parental love. He had it in groves. From what it sounds like, he wasn't displaying any kind of, outward mental health struggles. The stuff about, zombie and thinking he is the only person on Earth, a real person. This is a 14-year-old kid who probably played a lot of video games, but there didn't seem to be any actual concerns that he had some severe mental health issues. And even to this day, it sounds like that is still kind of questionable. This is Nick's place. Yeah. I don't know who Nick is, but he's got a place. It's located in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania. I guess it's some kind of recital hall. People would hold wedding events, school events, dances, and that's what was happening on this particular evening, which was April 24th, 1998. Parker Middle School was having a dance at Nick's place. It didn't sound like most people knew that Andrew Worst was even coming, but he did show up. He was armed with a .25 caliber pistol, which he stole from his father. At approximately 9:40, Andrew walks towards Nick's place where people are standing outside. One of those people was John Gillette. He was a teacher at the school. He just started opening fire and shot and killed him. He then reloaded and went inside. He fired a few more rounds inside and he hit Robert Zemeck and Jacob Turry. Both of them would end up surviving. He also shot another teacher, but the bullet just grazed them and they would be okay in the end. I swear they always look like this. Then, the owner of Nick's place, Nick I presume, He busted into the place with a shotgun, pointed the shotgun at Andrew and said, "Stop what the f*** you're doing right now." So he did. He stopped. The owner held him captive basically until police arrived. Police would prove this attack was planned. He even left a self-unaliving note under a pillow. His lawyers would get him psychiatric treatment. He was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, so he basically pleaded insanity. But then he took a plea deal and got 30 to 60 years in prison.
Okay, here we are, guys. You guys ask about the butthole sunning all the time.
Name one, right now. Name one person who has asked you about that. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Daniel L. Baker. Viewer discretion is advised. This case happened in Newark, Ohio, which is the home to this thing. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Unfortunately, I don't have a photo of Mr. Daniel L. Baker. I've been looking for a long time now. But the date was September 10th, 1996. There's a little bar in Newark called the Wagon Wheel. Daniel was at the bar, having himself a drink, just relaxing. And then this fella walked into the bar. His name, Herman Ashworth. That's an all-around very unfortunate name. He was originally from New Orleans, Louisiana, but he found his way to Ohio. So Daniel, along with his new acquaintance here, Herman, they would leave the Wagon Wheel and go to a different bar. And then they went back to the Wagon Wheel, sometime approximately between 9 and 10 p.m. Herman, before going back into the Wagon Wheel, he managed to lure Daniel down an alleyway. Not this alleyway. And then just a few short minutes later, Herman exits the alley and goes back into the bar. But where is Daniel? Well, a little bit later that evening, Herman's girlfriend, Tana Brett, well, he took her down this alleyway because he wanted to show her something. He wanted to show the body of Daniel Baker. He said he beat him to death with his fists and then stole $40 in cash and a couple credit cards. He and his girlfriend then just casually leave and go to another bar. What a great couple. He then goes back without his girlfriend and he drags Daniel's body and puts him underneath this metal door, like to a warehouse or something. And then at 3:45 a.m., a couple who's walking a dog discovers the body. Sometime that same evening/morning, 911 got themselves an anonymous phone call reporting the beating death. Now the caller said they wanted to be anonymous, but they traced the call. And it led back to this guy, Herman Ashworth. What an idiot. So he was brought in for questioning and he immediately confessed. He said Daniel had made unwanted sexual advances on him, which is what they love to say when the victim can't speak for themselves. The reality is Herman wanted money. So he was charged with capital murder. And he would be convicted of capital murder, and he was sentenced to death. On September 27, 2005, at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility, after eating a last meal of 2 cheeseburgers with lettuce and mayo, and then some french fries, and then a Dr. Pepper and a Mountain Dew, he was strapped to the table where his final words were, "A life for a life, let it be done, and justice will be served." He received lethal injection and was pronounced dead at 10:19 a.m. Good riddance. Was a satanic cult responsible for the murders that happened in this house? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Pam and Eric Ellender. Viewer discretion is advised. Pam Ellender was born on December 1st, 1965, and this was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Throughout school, she was a cheerleader, she was homecoming queen, she was someone who was described as always being happy and bubbly. After college, she would meet this man, Eric Ellender, who was described as a very bright and up-and-coming businessman. After they got married, they moved to Sulphur, Louisiana to be close to Pamela's parents. About a year later, she gave birth to their baby girl. Eric would end up working for Pam's father, and everything in their lives were going great. Until February 11th, 1991. After not hearing from them for a while, some folks went to their house and discovered that Eric and Pam were both shot dead on their bed. Their 18-month-old baby girl was alive and unharmed. They also noticed that their car was stolen. The crime scene showed shotguns on the ground, and it was determined that it was one of Eric's own shotguns that was used to kill them both. there were some indications of a robbery as well. But the house wasn't like damaged or seriously like rummaged through. Just a day later, Chris Prudhomme, an 18-year-old, was arrested in Baton Rouge. This is because he was caught driving Eric Ellender's stolen car. In that car were 3 other people with him. Chris immediately confessed to the murders. He even wrote out a letter saying he enjoyed very much killing of those 2 individuals. 17 days later, he was found hanging in his cell. He was rushed to the hospital, but would soon be pronounced dead. Pamela's parents felt that there were likely more people involved in this crime, so they hired a private investigator. The private investigators, I guess, discovered that Chris Prudhomme was a part of a group called Skaters, which stood for Satan's Kids Against the Establishment. The private investigator found some members of this cult and managed to interview a few of them. One of these members revealed that there was this big meeting the morning after the murders, basically about who's going to take the fall for these 2 killings. And essentially they decided that Chris Prudhomme was going to take the blame for it. This same person says there was also like a big party that happened at Eric and Pam Ellender's home the night of the murders, but that most of these people didn't even know there were 2 dead bodies in the house. However, after investigating the home itself, there was no indications that a party had taken place there, unless they cleaned up extremely well. But there was nothing, no signs of a party. One of the men arrested with Chris with the stolen car was Robert Atkins. Well, while he was out on bail for the stolen vehicle situation, he apparently had told friends that he was there when Chris shot and killed Pam and Eric. But then he changed his story to say that Chris didn't actually kill them and that it was the Skaters cult who told Chris or made Chris take the fall. This brought out other people to come forward to say that they were present in the house when the murders took place. Other members of this cult, which actually led to the indictment of a female named Kim who said, she was there when all this happened. But then the initial witness who basically said that Kim was in the house, that witness had then recanted all of their statements about this and admitted she was lying. And then this Kim person said, oh yeah, I wasn't actually there. And so the charges were dropped. So many people were like trying to make themselves involved and then recanting their statements. But ultimately, it really wasn't anything to do with this cult. Well, at least not that was ever actually proven. The group, Skaters, was real, they existed, and these were members of that group. And Chris Prudhomme and Robert Atkins were allegedly a part of that group. However, it appears that the men, along with a couple other people who were with them in the stolen vehicle when it was found, they had apparently done all this actually just on their own. They didn't know the Ellenders didn't know them, and this may have been a crime of opportunity. Just picked a random house to rob, and 2 people died from that. Robert Atkins would then plead guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter and got a total of 40 years plus some additional years for the stolen property. Several years later, he was released. He would end up breaking probation, going back to jail. The 2 other individuals who were there with the stolen car initially, they were charged as accessories after the fact, and each one of them got 2 years in prison. The police believe that nobody else was involved in these murders other than the 4 individuals. There's never been any physical evidence to definitively link this satanic cult to the murders directly. Just that certain members who are part of that cult committed the murders, but not that they were related. This was right in the middle of like the whole satanic panic movement. But ultimately, Eric and Pam Ellender got the justice they deserved. Well, sort of. I mean, their primary killer, Chris Prudhomme, ended his own life, but I guess in a way that is some kind of justice. A young woman is brutally murdered in Kansas, and it would be a billboard that helps solve the case. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Allie Kemp. Viewer discretion is advised. Alexandra Elizabeth Kemp, who would go by Allie, she was born on October 11th, 1982 in Leawood, Kansas. She had 2 brothers that she got along with, and she grew up in an incredibly loving home. Her family said that she grew up to be an absolutely wonderful young woman. She was remarkable. Allie had a dream to one day move to Russia so she could help those in need. By June of 2002, Allie had just finished her freshman year at Kansas State University, and she would get a job working as an attendant at a local pool. And this was like literally just down the road from where she lived. It was June 18th, 2002. The plan that day was she would go into work her normal shift, and then her brother would actually come and take over the night shift. When her brother got to the pool, he noticed Allie wasn't anywhere. The brother panicked, of course, and so he called their father to come, help him find Allie. After searching the pool itself and some of the surrounding buildings, they finally opened up the maintenance room, and they saw something that no father, that no brother should ever have to see. Allie Kemp was lying face down in a pool of blood and covered by a blue tarp. She was horrifically beaten, and then she was strangled until she was dead. And there was blood spatter everywhere. Allie's fingernails were broken off. It looked like she put up one hell of a fight. So police learned that Allie was supposed to meet a friend there sometime around 3 p.m. When the friend showed up, she honked her horn for Allie to come out, but Allie never came out. This friend then sees a man leaving the maintenance room area and walking away from the facility. The friend thought this guy looked a little suspicious, so she ended up driving away. But then later, when she found out what happened, she would give this description of the man she saw. However, no one seemed to recognize him, and there really wasn't a whole lot of evidence left behind that they could use, so the case went cold. And then Allie's father put out a $50,000 reward and put up this huge billboard in a very highly populated area. Roughly 2 years after Allie was murdered, someone had seen the billboard, saw the composite drawing, saw the truck, and they knew who it was. It was a man named Benjamin Appleby. He was the maintenance man at the pool. I don't know how no one knew who it was. Police learned he had gone to Connecticut. He was arrested for public exposure, which means then they can collect his DNA. There was DNA left behind with Allie, and it was a match. He confessed that he murdered Allie because he flirted with her and she rejected him, so he killed her. He was sentenced to 50 years to life. The family is desperately keeping hope alive, but 21 years later they are still asking, where is Danny Newville? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Daniel Lee Newville. Viewer discretion is advised. Daniel, who would go by Danny, was born on May 7th, 1984. He would be just a year older than me. Sometime around 2001-2002, Danny got into a little bit of trouble with the law. Danny associated himself with some problematic people, which would cause him to kind of get in some trouble. On July 31st, 2002, he was out on probation. That day, he would go to a friend's house in New London, Minnesota. Danny was then seen leaving that party now in the very early morning hours of August 1st, 2002. Apparently, he was leaving this house party to go to another house party. From what I understand, the first party was here on Ash Street Northeast and 2nd Avenue in New London, Minnesota. And I guess this is the path Danny could have taken to get to the next party. Allegedly, there was drug use at the party, and allegedly there may be drug use at this party as well. And yes, there were plenty of people drinking. This is another path I guess he could have possibly taken to get to that location, but no one really knows what path he took. It's reported that someone saw Danny just outside the first house and offered him a ride to the next party, but Danny apparently said, no thank you. He wanted to walk there. And Danny never got to the next house. Danny was never seen again. And this part is where I'm kind of confused, because I guess allegedly he wasn't reported missing until about 10 days later, according to his dad. However, police say that a missing persons report wasn't actually filed until a month and a half later. I don't know if that's just some kind of paperwork issue or what the case is with all of that. I don't know. Danny's parents have said they believe he met with foul play. He did run with some crowds that, did nefarious dealings from time to time. Danny wasn't known to be a violent person. He never instigated fights. But it's possible being around, the wrong crowd that one of those people may have done something to Danny. But it's nearly 21 years later, and no one has seen him. They did comb through Henderson Lake, which I guess is in Kandiyohi County in Minnesota, based on tips they got, but they found absolutely nothing. The family is holding on to hope that he may still be alive, but the grim reality is likely not. If you have any information on the missing Danny Newville, please call 320-235-1260. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of John D. Hall. Viewer discretion is advised. Unfortunately, you're going to have to stare at this mug the entire video because I cannot find any confirmed photos of his victim. John D. Hall was married to Billie Jo Hall, and they lived in Madison County, Tennessee. Billie Jo had 2 children from a previous marriage, and then her and John had 2 more children of their own. By early 1994, the 2 of them were beginning to have some serious problems, and the relationship was just on a downward spiral. It got to a point where John was basically no longer living in the house, and Billie Jo was there with all 4 of their kids at the house. On July 29th, 1994, John would go to the house to talk to Billie Jo. He said he wanted to discuss reconciliating the relationship. He brought with him a whopping $25 money order as a child support. Wow. What Billie Jo did not know is that before he entered the house, he disabled the phone lines outside. When he knocked on the door and she opened it, he just shoved his way in. The kids were in the living room watching TV. Billie Jo goes and sits back down on the chair, where he then takes the chair and tips it over, basically dumping her onto the ground. He screams at the kids, "Go to your room," which they finally comply, and then he takes Billie Jo back to the master bedroom. That's when the kids say they can hear a whole bunch of screaming and things slamming around the room. Their mother sounds like she's screaming bloody murder. They try to get into the room, but the door is blocked. But eventually they push their way in. These little children actually tried to stop him from hurting their mom. One of them jumped on his back and bit him. They said, "We're going to go get help for mom." And he said, "If you go get help, I'm going to kill her." But then they heard him say to Billie Jo, because she was in college at the time, he said, "You're not graduating from college." The kids try to call 911, but they can't because the phones are disabled. As the kids left the house finally to go get help, one of them saw John dragging Billie Jo basically by her head out to the backyard. As the kids are trying to go get help, he takes Billie Jo to the backyard where he begins to strangle her, and then he shoves her into the pool. And the police arrive several minutes later. He's gone. Billie Jo's van is gone, but Billie Jo is deceased in the pool. Her cause of death was a combination of strangulation and drowning, and she had been severely beaten. There's blood all over the house. Obviously, because the kids witnessed this entire thing, they were able to point to police exactly who did it. They tracked him down. He was arrested and charged with the murder. He would go on to be convicted and sentenced to death, where he is apparently still awaiting his execution. What a piece of shit. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Carol Foreman. Viewer discretion is advised. Carol was born on December 8th, 1943. At the time of this story, she's 75 years old and she's working at the Bethesda thrift store. And this is near Waupun, Wisconsin, or I guess in the Mayville, Wisconsin area. Carol was all about making sure family came first, and she just loved being around all of them, and she had a large family. She was the mother of, I believe, 3, and had 8 grandchildren and 10 great-grandchildren. Carol loved to watch the Milwaukee Brewers and the Minnesota Vikings. She was just a sweet, sweet lady. And unfortunately, it would be one of her own family members that ended her life. This is Greg Spittle. Greg was one of her grandchildren. He was 31 years old at the time of this story. Greg had a rough life. He also had his own children, but he was into drugs and alcohol and run-ins with the law. Well, his grandmother Carol one day would tell police about some things, with regards to Greg, and this would actually lead to him getting arrested and losing custody of his kids. Because again, he was not following the law. I don't know the exact laws, however, in which his grandmother reported him to police. All I know is that it really pissed him off. Sometime down the road, Greg is out and about, and it's August 23rd, 2019. Greg and his grandmother Carol got into, I guess, an argument. It almost sounds like it was one-sided on Greg's end. And Greg, well, he lashed out at her physically. He punched her several times in the head, so forcefully that the 75-year-old woman fell backwards and slammed the back of her head onto the concrete ground. And then, as blood is basically pooling out, he just goes upstairs and watches TV. And she's still alive, downstairs in the basement. And he leaves her down there for nearly a day, still alive. The next day, he goes to his neighbor, has the neighbor call 911 because somehow the cartel killed his grandmother, or tried to kill her. So an ambulance was called and she was rushed to the hospital. But several days later, she would die. And this was from blunt force trauma-related injuries. Eventually, police would realize that it was, in fact, Greg who did it. It was a drug and alcohol-fueled attack. This is the type of devastation that can come from it. Greg was convicted of second-degree reckless homicide. He got 13 years in prison, and then 7 years of extended supervision. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Alexander Rubel. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this story, Alexander Rubel was a 17-year-old who lived in the Estonia area. Estonia is in Europe. Yes. Between 1997 and 1998, the Estonia area would be ravaged by a serial killer. That serial killer was Alexander. The 17-year-old would find himself huffing gasoline, which put his mental state in a not great place. On September 19th, 1997, unfortunately there's no photos of the victims, Alexander was neighbors with a disabled man named Tanyu Pold. Alexander would later say that he just had a desire to kill someone. He said it could have been anybody, but he wanted to choose Tanyu first because he knew Tanyu couldn't get away from him. So he stabbed the older gentleman to death. On November 7th, 1997, Alexei Pavlov was staying at the Rubel house. Well, Alexander's father thought that Pavlov was sleeping with his wife, so his father stabbed Pavlov 4 times. But then Alexander finished him off by strangling him. And then they just threw his body out the window. In January of 1998, his next victim was Jeannie Bryant. He would stab him to death as well. He was a random target. In February of 1998, he would decapitate a random person as well, named Vladimir Ivanov. Just wrong place, wrong time for Vladimir. A couple days later, also in February 1998, Olga Voronkova would be his next victim. She lived in the apartment building that the Rubels lived in. Then, in March of 1998, he killed his next victim, Vladimir Kinzersky. Then, in June of 1998, he killed another person, 15-year-old Alice Silvas. He had cut her throat. He had been involved in the murders of 7 people. 6 of them he did all by himself. Now, eventually he was caught. He was charged with all of the murders, and how they caught him, I'm not 100% sure. But here's the shittiest part. Because he was between the ages of 16 and 17 when he committed all of these murders, he was sentenced to the maximum imprisonment of 8 years. Simply because he was a minor when he did these things. Even though he was fully aware of what he was doing, he essentially planned most of this, and he only got 8 years. He was at Tartu prison, and then he was released in 2006. And as far as anyone knows, he's just out there roaming the world, hopefully not killing anyone. A young boy in Colorado went out to walk his dog, but unfortunately, he never came home. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Christopher James Harvey. Viewer discretion is advised. Christopher James Harvey was born on August 9th, 1969. He and his family lived in Andrews, Texas, but they had a summer home in Colorado. Specifically, the summer home was located in Hinsdale County, Colorado. And this was just on the outskirts of the San Juan National Forest. The family was there in July of 1984. And on July 11th, 1984, Christopher would vanish. That day, the 14-year-old boy went to go visit a neighbor who was a friend of his. I guess they talked about band camp and summer camp. And then, according to the friend's family, Christopher left that house, which is a trailer, sometime after 3:30 p.m. All anyone knows at that point is that Christopher got his dog to take for a walk. But then, later that day, the dog got back to the trailer unharmed, but Christopher was nowhere to be found. Hinsdale County, Colorado, at least back then, is a very rural area. A lot of areas to hike and camp, and so authorities first thought that Christopher took some impromptu hiking trip. But Christopher never told anyone he was planning to go hiking. However, he did enjoy hiking. He also backpacked a lot when they're in Hinsdale. But when looking back at their home, their summer home, they noticed that he didn't bring anything with him. He didn't have his backpack. He certainly didn't appear to have any, rations, food, water, anything. And he would never take his dog for a walk and then just let the dog go home on its own. Approximately 6 weeks after Christopher disappeared, a teenager showed up in a hospital and he had been extremely beaten. And this was in Eagle County, Colorado. This teenager's face was just completely bashed, but he was alive. That individual fell into a coma, and I don't know if they ever came to or not. When Christopher's parents looked at this boy, they said they believed that it was Christopher, but they were unsure, so they did a dental exam, and the dental records showed that that person was definitely not Christopher Harvey. At this point, the authorities believe that Christopher Harvey met with foul play. They just don't know in what capacity. They don't know if he was kidnapped or just killed, but they think there was some illegal wrongdoing here. However, if alive today, he would look something vaguely like this. If you have any information, please call 970-944-2291. Two moms and a Coke can would help solve a 24-year-old murder mystery. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Mandy Stavik. Viewer discretion is advised. Amanda Stavik, who would go by Mandy, was born on April 16, 1971, in Bellingham, Washington. At the time of this case, she was attending Central Washington University. She had a boyfriend that she loved dearly. She seemed to be just loved by every single person who ever met her. She had this infectious smile, a very bubbly personality. She was an athlete and incredibly intelligent. And whenever Mandy could go for a jog, whenever an opportunity came up, she would do it. And that's exactly what she was doing on November 24th, 1989. The 18-year-old would get her dog, and they would go for a run just after Thanksgiving dinner. Except Mandy never got home. The dog returned home, but she was nowhere to be found. So she was reported missing right away. The entire town was all in on searching for her. The search would last 3 days before they found her. One of the detectives was searching near the Nooksack River in Washington, and they found her nude body just floating in the water. The only thing she had on was her shoes, her running shoes. It was very evident that she had been sexually assaulted, and then she was bludgeoned and then just left in the river. They did recover male bodily fluid from her, but right away it did not match anyone. They did investigate her boyfriend. They took his DNA. It was not a match. And he was eventually just completely ruled out. They also thought a local homeless man may have done this, but the person they focused on, they also were able to rule out. And then for about 24 years, the case just went cold. They had nothing. They had DNA, but it wasn't matching anyone. They got DNA from all of the men in her life. They got DNA from a whole bunch of volunteer men just to rule them out, and they got nothing. And then in 2013, Heather Backstrom and Marilee Anderson were at a water park with their kids. They started to talk about the past. They had gone to high school with Mandy, even though the three of them never knew each other. These two ladies didn't know each other when they talked at the water park either. As they were discussing the murder of Mandy, they both came up with one person who they thought did it. His name was Tim Bass. This is him in 1989. Apparently, he was known to be a very big creep around that time. He was just super disturbing when he was around women and girls. Both of these women had experiences with him, like going into their homes and making them feel really, really uncomfortable. And so when they're talking about the case 24 years later, they both thought Tim Bass. He was always kind of looked at as a predator, but he was never on police's radar back in '89. And no, I don't really know why he was not on their radar back then. But at any rate, in 2013, he's now married with 3 children. He's got a comfortable job, and he is just, skated by in life, not causing any trouble. But because these 2 moms had gone to police with their suspicions, and because he was never even looked at as a suspect back in '89, they thought, okay, let's look at this guy. They question him. He denies everything. He said he didn't even know her, never met her, even though he went to the same school. They politely asked him for his DNA. He said no. They didn't have enough probable cause to get an actual warrant, so they had to be kind of crafty. So Tim's boss was talked to by police. She was more than happy to help them. So for the next few months, she basically watched Tim on everything he did at work. Now, he was always careful to throw everything away where no one else would get it. So he took all his trash with him. But one day, he dropped a Coke can and a plastic cup in the garbage without thinking. His boss takes both of those items, hands it over to police. They get DNA from both items. They know it's Tim Bass's. And it was a match. Tim Bass had sexually assaulted Mandy Stavik, killed her, and then just left her in a river. When he was presented with all the evidence, he suddenly said, oh, wait a minute. Oh, no, I know Mandy. We had a relationship. Yeah, we had a consensual sexual relationship. Now I remember. Okay. He had already said he had never met her before, ever. His own friends, his own family, co-workers, all testified against him. His family said he had this insane contempt for women. He hated women, at least back in the 80s and 90s. But he always said, no, I'm innocent. But a jury didn't think so. They found him guilty. Now, he was not charged with first-degree murder. This was not something they can prove was premeditated. So he was convicted of a lesser murder charge and was sentenced to 27 years in prison. So there will be a point where he is a free man. I just don't know if that truly is justice. You know what I mean?